Welcome to the 4th Italian Congress of the OIBR Foundation. Welcome, everybody. My task is to introduce you our foundation and our conference, today's conference. So I'd like to begin speaking about our foundation. And the second slide, please. And the next one. The OIBR Foundation is a legally recognized foundation open to new participants. We are really open to everybody that would like to come with us, as we are a market-led organization. We are driven by the market and by our stakeholders. And we are inspired by an inclusive approach. Not exclusive. We'd like to include everyone. And so also our governance, we will see later, is articulated in a way to guarantee all the interests at stake. So we are market-led, we have an inclusive approach, and we are a non-profit entity. We have no commercial engagement at all. And we think we have to operate just in the public interest. We are a body operating in the public interest, market-led, with an inclusive approach, a non-profit entity with a no commercial engagement. The next one. And the next slide, please. And we are born in 2019, but we have an ancient history as we has replaced the network of International Italian Business Reporting, founded on February 2012, and we are dealing with many issues related to the reporting and to disclosure of information and measures, KPIs, related to sustainability, to ESG, to climate change, to non-financial reporting, to intangibles, to intellectual capital, and integrated reporting and governance. We have about 60 Italian stakeholders, whom we have great and deep relationships. And they are composed by listed companies, small, medium enterprises, universities, departments, school of business, but also individual academics, professionals, especially chartered accountants in Italy, and managers, financial analysts, consultants, and so on. We are so proud to have been recognized and supported by some very relevant international bodies, the IIRC, the GRIs, the Sustainability Accounting Standard Board, and we also represent the Italian jurisdiction of the Vicky Global Network. Furthermore, we are also a member through our Secretary General, Stefano Zambon, of the IRRC Council. It is important for us to have deep roots in Italy, but we are all over the world with our relationship and our stakeholders. The next one. And we would like to promote studies and researches. Our purpose is to build culture, to build awareness about our teams, about business reporting, about non-financial disclosure, about sustainability integrated reporting, about climate change recommendations and intangible related information, studies and researches, but also to promote guidelines and to disseminate these guidelines, to organize conferences, seminars, meetings, experience exchanges. I don't quote about 10 conferences, 15 seminars we have each year, so we organize each year, but perhaps many of you know them very well. And we'd like to promote principles and standards with a technical-based orientation throughout Italy, but having an exchange of experience with all the world, The next one, please. This is our last published study that is about management control and integrated reporting. It's the result of a study led by Stefano Marasca, a colleague of ours, an Italian colleague of ours, and a working group, very important, that it be about the comparison of corporate experience. This is the last one. You find November 2020. Really, we published it recently. And so please go to our website and pick it up. It should be very interesting. It should be very interesting for you to read this study and to debate with us about this management control and integrated reporting. But we have not just like that. If you go to the next one, please, you can find also many other studies and guidance. From the left to the right, you find this one, but also climate change, financial, enterprise financial and insurance issues, integrated reporting for SMEs, guidelines about that, business model representation in integrated reporting, best practices and guidelines coming from the previous network of international business reporting. And so we are proud that all these studies and guidances are free, and you can pick up from our website. We can continue to do it. And in the next slide, you can see that we have ongoing research. And when we have a research, we have a working group working on it. In this moment, we have a first working group about performance measurement and SDGs. This is led by Professor Lino Cinquini, who we will meet him in the conclusion of this conference, and Professor Maria Serena Chiucchi, so it is performance measurement and SDGs, and then non-financial information and the price crisis, led by Patrizia Criva and Andrea Panizza, and a new one about materiality, led by Professor Riccardo Stacchezzini and Donato Calace. And we have the purpose to debate about the material issues that is nowadays very important to monitor the evolution of sustainability-related material issues. And we are thinking about new working groups about integrated reporting and non-financial information in the public sector, as well as the ESG information and executive compensation. We are thinking about new working groups, and in the few months, we will do also this next step, the next one. We have also new collaboration initiative with the benefit company about the observatory of benefit company accountability and impact with the ASSOBenefit, that is the official Italian Association of Benefit Companies. Is a subject very important nowadays, and we have Sara Cirone, Vittorio Dell'Ati, Isabella Cristina representing OIBR in this observatory. And then we will do research together with the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants about integrated thinking as SMEs. And now we are very, very proud to announce you that we will help the IIRC in translating the Italian new version of the integrating reporting framework that will appear in June about 2021. And we are so proud that OIBR has been chosen by the IIRC to translate this new framework into the Italian language. The next one. As you can see, our governance is very open. Because we have a general assembly of founders and members, and then we have a management council in charge of governing, of managing our foundation. I'm the president, but we have also the vice president, the treasurer. But the real engine, you know very well that our real engine is our Secretary General, Stefano Zambon, and I thank him very, very much for all he did for our foundation and for this conference as well. So we have also a supervisory council, a scientific committee, a council of statutory auditors, and we have also international observers. And you can find the people, they are president of these bodies. And we are very happy that they work together with us in a very proactive way. So we are dealing about now the Italian Congress with the next slide. I already told the title, and you know him, toward the standardization of non-financial and sustainability information, regional versus global approaches. So what we have to say, the next one, we have a great debate nowadays, and we know, the next slide, please, thanks, that we have about 33 international and national speakers, and we are happy to have them, and I thank you them very much. And in this moment, we are about 450 registrants from 10 different countries, aiming at attending as about 7 hours live session under the scientific patronage of Italian university. It's not common in Italy to have so many universities supporting a conference. Turin, Ferrara, Verona, Catholic University, Bari, Polytechnic of Marche, Sant'Anna School, and University of Chieti Pescara. But we have to deal shortly about our conference, saying why we are here today. We know that there is a great debate about these things, and we have presenting 2 studies on the roadmap to standardize European non-financial information. We have IFRS Foundation announcing an operational plan for sustainability standard board in September 2021. We have the European Commission prepare a new directive. We have ESMA asking for standardization on financial information. We have standard setter taking part to a group of 5. We have IRC and SAB merging into a value reporting foundation. So there is new spaces for these themes. Sustainability matters to be included into corporate reports. And there are new actors belonging and trying to enter in this new space. And there are new boundaries to be settled, new rule system to be settled, to new jurisdiction to be discussed among organization, professional, institutions, authorities, and so on. New boundaries, new jurisdictions. And there is a great problem, that of reproduction of the intellectual capital that should be useful to promote these new boundaries and new real system in this new space. So we'd like to give an help to everybody to understand better what is going on. And this is why we have, the next slide, please, two main sessions, the morning session and the afternoon session. The morning session would like to make you understand the international landscape with the evolution of the institutional scenario. I don't quote the many important, very important speakers appearing here. We have a keynote speaker, very important, and we have a round table. And the same, the next one, in the afternoon session, where the focus is on the Italian perspective. So at the beginning, the international one, following with the international perspective, to make the readers, to make the participants more conscious of what is happening now and how we are creating new jurisdiction among all the actors and how to create new professional capital. So I would like just the next one to wish you to have a nice Congress. And please follow us on our website that you find here, on our social media, follow up. And if you like it, you can also become member of our foundation, because as I said before, we are inclusive. We would like to include everyone. We are open to your support and to your ideas. Many thanks to everybody. Have a nice Congress.
Thanks a lot, Alessandro, for your kind introduction and for introducing the Congress. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Today, I have the great honor and pleasure to chair the first session of the OIBR Congress. As Alessandro has just mentioned, the aim of this session is to offer an overview of the recent developments in the area of corporate reporting that are occurring in Europe and globally. And what is particularly interesting to see in this period is the institutional trajectory, which appears to be quite dense and also very rapid. So to do so, we will be hearing from the voice of the main institutional actors that are leading on these developments. We will start with Mr. Alan Deckers, who is head of corporate reporting unit of the European Commission, who will tell us a little bit more, to the extent possible, of what's going to happen with the new version of the European Non-Financial Reporting Directive. We will then move to Mr. Patrick de Cambourg, who is chair of the EFRA Project Task Force on the preparatory work on European non-financial reporting standards, as well as the chairman and the president of the Autorité des Normes Comptables, who will tell us and discuss the two documents and the document that this task force has released just on the 8th of March. We will be then moving to Mr. Alessandro Deri, who is Policy Officer at the European Securities and Markets Authority, to know what's their viewpoint on these recent developments in Europe and globally. And then we will move to Professor Lucrezia Reiklin, who is professor at London Business School, but also a trustee at the IFRS Foundation. As we also yesterday, we saw that they just announced a working group to bring forward the work of the IFRS SSB. We will then conclude with a discussant, Professor Vera Palea, who is also a member of the United Nations ISAR Working Group. She's a professor at the University of Turin and part of the scientific committee of the OIBR Foundation. So we have been asking, just to start, all the speakers to provide a speech of around 15 minutes. Then Professor Vera Palea will act as a discussant for the remaining 5 to 10 minutes. And if the time allows, it will be really good to have a little bit of interaction among the speakers on the basis of the speeches that they just delivered. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Alan Deckers. So please, Alan, thanks a lot. So we will be all eager to know what's going on with the new version of the Non-Financial Reporting Directive. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Laura, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you and with all the other distinguished participants. Before plunging into the details, what I would like to do is just to take a step back. There is a lot happening at the moment, but it's important to remember the big picture and ask ourselves, why are we doing all of this? And the reasons are very clear. There is a severe climate challenge, even crisis that we face, more generally a sustainability crisis that we face, and the EU has already announced a number of policy measures to address that. Of course, the European Green Deal provides the overall framework, but there is also the European Climate Strategy, and of course the EU has already adopted a number of pieces of legislation, which I'll return to in a minute. But it's not just the EU that is discussing and acting on these topics. There's a great deal of activity also at international level, and both about ESG challenges in general, but also in particular about the ways to address the climate crisis, and that also includes discussions about disclosures at international level. Those discussions are taking place in the FSB, Financial Stability Board, the Group of Seven, which is this year chaired by the United Kingdom, and of course that is also looking towards the COP26, sorry, that will take place in November, again under British chairmanship, and of course also in the G20, which is this year chaired by Italy, and which has also launched quite intensive work on these topics. And of course, I will not steal Lucrezia's thunder, but there is also very important work being done by the IFRS Foundation. Before plunging into the details of the non-financial reporting directive, I just want to come back to that legislation that the EU has already adopted. Way back in 2018, it feels like a long time ago, although really it's only yesterday, the EU published a Sustainable Finance Action Plan, which was accompanied by 2 legislative proposals that have now already become law. They are the regulation establishing the taxonomy on sustainable finance activities and also the regulation on sustainability disclosures in the financial sector, the so-called SFDR. There is intensive work going on in the Commission to adopt all the remaining regulations that are required to make those pieces of legislation fully operational. There is very intensive discussion at the moment about the taxonomy. The Commission is preparing the first delegated act on the climate objectives. In 2022, we will move towards the other environmental objectives or rather the Commission will adopt delegated acts on the other environmental objectives. And there is also a meeting point, and if I can go, a review clause in the regulation to move later on also to social issues. On the SFDR, that became applicable on the 10th of March, so just under 2 weeks ago. There is also intensive work by the Commission at the moment, based on input that we have received from ESMA and the other ESAs, to that is already on the books. And of course, now we are working on the revision of the non-financial reporting directive, which is, if I can put it that way, the third leg of the chair. I think we all know that chairs with only 2 legs are unstable. So we are putting a third leg on the chair, and that third leg is going to be the revision of the non-financial reporting directive. There is a great deal of interest and pressure for us to move rather quickly with the review of the non-financial reporting directive, partly because, of course, investors that are now subject to the SFDR are asking for better, more reliable, more comparable information from investee companies, and that is what the review of the non-financial reporting directive is intended to deliver. So I'll focus a little bit more now on the review of the non-financial reporting directive, just go through the main elements that we are working on. We are planning to adopt the proposal. The Commission is planning to adopt the proposal in the very near future, hopefully on the 21st of April, so just under a month from now. And of course, you will have to wait for the Commission to adopt its proposal and publish its proposal to see the details of what is in that proposal. But I can just run you through the main topics and main issues that we are working on and that we think deserve attention as part of this review. First of all, we have received very clear messages from investors and other users that information published by companies is not sufficiently comparable. This is a well-known problem. It's a problem that we have dealt with in the past, also in the field of financial reporting. And the way we solved it there was by moving towards the use of common standards. The NFRD, as it was adopted in 2014, does not foresee or does not require the use of common standards. That was perhaps understandable at the time. In 2014, this was a fairly new area with not a lot of technical maturity. So the directive was fairly high level, fairly principles-based, in fact, very principles-based, and gave a great deal of flexibility to companies as to how they wish to comply with its requirements, or the requirements of national law transposing the directive, rather. Now, as I said, that was understandable at the time, but markets have moved on, and especially in the last 2 or 3 years, things have moved very, very quickly. And so our conclusion at this stage is that the directive as it currently exists no longer meets the needs of the market, nor even meets the needs of regulation more widely. And I've mentioned, for example, the link with the SFDR. So that is clearly an issue that we need to look at. It is therefore no surprise that in December of 2019, the Council of Ministers, the Economic and Financial Council, asked the Commission to explore the development of an EU sustainability reporting standard, or a non-financial reporting standard, as it was called in the Council conclusions. Similarly, the European Parliament has pushed the Commission to further develop the reporting framework under the NFRD, and that led us then to give a couple of mandates to EFRAG to explore the possible development of EU sustainability reporting standards. Now, I'm not going to steal Patrick's thunder either. I will let him present the recommendations from EFRAG, but clearly this is an area that currently attracts a lot of attention. I have said on a number of occasions already that I think it's very difficult to see how we solve the problems that we have identified without moving to the use of common standards. But I must insist that this is ultimately a decision that will be taken at a much higher level. It will be taken in the College of Commissioners as far as the Commission's proposal is concerned, and that will then trigger a legislative process involving the European Parliament and the Council. And of course, we will have to see what is decided by the legislators in that context. What we do hope is that that process can be concluded relatively quickly, so that we can implement the new legislation as quickly as possible too, and thereby also meet the needs of investors that are subject to the SFDR. So that is comparability is clearly a big challenge in this area. But linked to comparability, there is also a question mark about the reliability of information that is published by companies. There have been many analyses of the reports and disclosures that European companies currently publish or have published over the last 2 or 3 years. And I think it's fair to say that the unanimous conclusion of those analyses and reports is that while things are improving, we are still some way from where we should be. And we need to improve the reliability of information. Now, clearly, standards by themselves should help to make progress in that direction, but standards alone are not sufficient. Another topic that we are therefore looking at in this context is assurance and audit of sustainability information. At the moment, the non-financial statement foreseen in the non-financial reporting directive is entirely carved out from any type of assurance or audit requirements. It is even carved out from the consistency check that auditors normally do between the management report and the financial statements. In essence, the only thing that the auditor has to do is to check whether the non-financial statement has been published if the company is subject to the NFRD. And given that the clear message we receive from investors is that sustainability information or non-financial information or ESG information, doesn't really matter what we call it, is increasingly important for investment decision making. And indeed, in some cases, is even more important than financial information these days. There is clearly a big question mark about whether the current situation is tenable. And so audit and assurance is one of the topics that we are looking at. And again, you're going to have to wait for the proposal to be published on the 21st of April to see exactly what we will propose. But that is an area that is clearly drawing our attention. Linked to reliability, another aspect that is very important is enforcement. And again, I'm sure Alessandro will say a few words about that. That is, enforcement should also be facilitated if we move towards a common standard, because it's much easier to enforce and to enforce in a consistent manner across Europe if there is a common reference framework to do that work. But in addition to that, there are also a number of loopholes in the current directive which create some difficulties. One example, the directive currently gives an option to companies or to member states to permit the publication of sustainability information in a separate report. In a number of countries, that separate report is not under the mandate of the capital market supervisor, because that's how the law is constructed. So that is clearly a loophole that we need to look at. Third aspect, which is linked to standards, but not it's in a fairly direct way, is the very strong demand we have received to move towards digital reporting. Many investors say that they need, or investors, not only investors, also other users, including, for example, civil society organizations, are saying that they need this type of information in a digital structured format. Now, we have already moved towards structured digital reporting for financial reporting in Europe, at least for IFRS reporting by listed companies, through the so-called European Single Electronic Format. And clearly, it would be possible to extend that to sustainability information. But the more important point I want to make is that we are thinking about digitization as an integral part of this review. And again, I expect that you will see some proposals on that topic in the proposal that will be published on the 21st of April. Last key element I want to mention in relation to the revision is the scope of the directive. There is a clear demand, again, from many users to receive information from a broader range of companies. At the moment, the directive applies to large public interest entities with more than 500 employees. Some EU member states, and some EEA member states even, have transposed that directive, and as part of that have dropped the threshold through to 250 employees, but it's still mainly public interest entities, although some countries have broadened the scope to so-called national public interest entities, which is a possibility they have under the law. It's to expand the range of companies that are considered public interest entities. But even so, the clear message we are receiving is that investors need sustainability information from a broader range of companies, and therefore that is also something that we are looking at. I'll say a few words more about the scope under the next point, which is now turning to standards. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of EFRAG's recommendations. Patrick, I'm sure, will do that. I just want to highlight 2 points about standards. First of all, we receive a lot of questions about how the interaction between European and international standards is going to work or could work. We have tried to be very clear from the Commission side that so we do not see this as a choice between European standards and international standards. We think we need both, and we fully support work to achieve greater convergence of requirements at international level. I've often said that the current landscape at international level is a very confusing one. Many people use the term alphabet soup. It really is an alphabet soup, and still there are more letters being added to the alphabet on an almost monthly basis. So the alphabet soup is not getting simpler, but clearly there is an absolute need to converge and to consolidate requirements at international level. The current situation is confusing for investors, and it is problematic for preparers. So we fully support the initiatives that are ongoing to achieve some more clarity and convergence at international level, and the EU is fully behind that. At the same time, we have also been very clear to say that whatever standards we use must meet the needs of European legislation. And that has a number of consequences because, for example, European legislation already is based on the principle of double materiality. That is true both for the existing non-financial reporting directive. It is also true for the SFDR that applies to asset managers and other investment intermediaries. And therefore, whatever standards we adopt in Europe will need to be based on the double materiality principle. Secondly, our legislation addresses the full spectrum of ESG issues, not only climate. Climate is a very important and very urgent challenge that we need to address, but it is not the only one. And so we need to look wider than just climate. And third, as I mentioned before, we are under a great deal of pressure. There is a great deal of urgency to move forward in Europe, and we therefore need to start working yesterday, if I can put it that way. Second point I wanted to highlight in relation to standards and more generally returning to the scope of the NFRD, I would be very surprised if the College of Commissioners decided to propose that the NFRD would apply to all SMEs across Europe. There is a great deal of attention to proportionality, and while some categories of SMEs may fall within the future scope of the non-financial reporting directive, again, I would be surprised if all of them did. So the report from EFRAG also suggests the development of voluntary standards for SMEs. These are variously referred to as simplified standards or targeted standards, depending on one's preferred choice of terminology. But what is important, I think, to remember is that SMEs, whether or not they are covered by the NFRD, will increasingly be asked for sustainability information, whether it is by their banks when they ask for loans, whether it is by their clients when they sign contracts to supply them with their products and services, whether it is by their insurance companies, perhaps even. So SMEs are going to have to respond to this challenge of sustainability reporting too, and therefore we think we need to provide them with very practical but proportionate tools to achieve that. So that's something that we are also reflecting about in the context of our work on the revision of the non-financial reporting directive. As I said, we hope to come up with a proposal very, very soon, and that we can also make good progress under the next the current presidency and the next two presidencies. Hopefully, we can finalize the legislative process during the first half of 2022. And we think we will need to work in parallel on the legislative process and on the technical process of developing standards, if indeed that is the political decision that the College of Commissioners takes in its proposal. So I'll stop there, and happy to come back for later rounds of questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alan, for sharing with us the criticalities, but also the plan of the European Commission to move forward with non-financial and sustainability reporting in Europe, but also we heard abroad. So we're now moving to Patrick de Cambourg to know a little bit more of the comprehensive, very comprehensive work that the task force that he has been chairing has been doing in a very strict amount of time. So Patrick, please, if you could tell us a little bit more about the report and the view of EFRAG on this important issue.
Thank you, Laura, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all participants. It is a pleasure to elaborate around the report that has been issued and that is public. That has been public for the last 2 weeks. Can I go to the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So this is a report. You have the link. It's a fairly voluminous report with appendices. We decided not to lose what had been done during the assessment phase. It's been the report itself is the output of a consensus, and I would like to illustrate quickly the work that has been done with the next slide. So it's a multi-stakeholder project task force. 35 members originating from 13 European countries, and together with 9 EU public authorities representatives. In order to succeed, we regrouped a project management office to offer support to the task force of about 18 people, 3 at central level and 15 dedicated to the 6 work streams that we organized. In total, we estimate that that has required a full-time equivalent of 30 to 40 people for the 5 months where we have been in operation, mid-September to mid-February. 3-phase approach. First one, September, October, dedicated to assessment. What is the state of play in the EU and globally? November, December, with an overlap in January, the proposal phase where we were building a number of proposals. As you have seen, and it's a bit too much maybe, but we will put them in a more in a clearer format. 54 proposals and consensus building. In January and February, we built consensus. We conducted outreach events, 7, with a huge success in the EU because we had more than 3,000 participants. 5 events in member states, Italy, Spain, France, Germany, and the Nordic countries, and 2 in Brussels, including one dedicated to financial institutions. And we took all that on board and drafted the report, which has been adopted early February by the task force as a whole. So the report itself, next slide please, is organized. I will not elaborate around that because that's when Alain is not around. I need sometimes to refer to the legislative context. And you have to understand that the task force worked at the same time as, the drafting of the NFRD. Therefore, somehow, based on the dialogue we had with the Commission, we had to make some assumptions. It was not really a moving target because, as Alain has illustrated, there are a number of options that are pretty clear. However, we need to be careful because obviously the legislative, first of all, the adoption by the College of Commissioners has not taken place yet, and the legislative process will carry on with a target date, if we do understand, for the first half of 2022. So, next slide, please. The report is built around 4 key sections. The first one is what we call the foundations. This is not standard setting per se, but this is absolutely key to operate the standard setting activities. It is the landscape in which, or the platform from which you build standard setting. It's a combination of factors. I will explain. The next section is dedicated to the conceptual framework. In the EU, in the legal system, the concepts are of a legislative level normally, but we feel that there was a need to elaborate around, and that's why we recommend that conceptual guidelines be elaborated. The third section is dedicated to the target architecture of standards. It's a medium-term vision, say 2030, for instance. What should the sustainability reporting landscape in the EU look like at the end of when you have reached the target and when you reach the stage of maintenance, a stable platform. And then, of course, due to the short time frame that Alain Deckers has illustrated very well, we need also to think in terms of roadmap, how to implement this quickly. And on even if we admit there is a step-by-step basis, there is a need for game-changing steps to start with. So that's the 4th section. And also in these 4 sections, you have the interaction with the International Convergence Project. Okay, let's move please to the next slide. So this is the summary of the report. Can we move to the next one again? Thank you. What is important is the purpose. In the introduction, we try to elaborate a purpose for sustainability reporting in the EU. And it's to provide relevant, faithful, comparable, and reliable information. Okay. On what and for what? On, and that's the illustration of the double materiality concept, on material sustainability impacts of the reporting entity on stakeholders, and 2, material sustainability risks and opportunities for its own value creation. And for what purpose, per se? To enable users of information to understand the entity's sustainability objectives, position, and performance, and to inform their decisions relating to their engagement with the entity. So this may seem boilerplate, but in fact it's not, because it is distinctive to a large extent. Next, please. As regards the foundations, I would like to say that, as I said, it's not standard setting per se, but it addresses the unique combination of principles and objectives, what we call building blocks here, that constitute the platform upon which the EU standard should be elaborated. 2 overarching principles that are familiar in a EU context, but that nevertheless very important to mention. The need to consider an inclusive range of stakeholders, investors, and others on an equal footing. And also a principle-based system, in fact, an hybrid system combining principles and detailed prescriptions when necessary. The building blocks. The first one is to align sustainability reporting with EU public policies related to sustainable development, sustainable finance, and corporate accountability. So this is a linkage with the public good dimension. The second building block is at the same time building on and contributing to international progress, the EU being by tradition committed to global convergence. This implies partnering and co-constructing with willing parties as much as possible. The third building block is making sure the reporting system is delivering data the financial institutions need to fulfill their role when investing and lending in the context of transitions. The fourth is considering sector-specific relevance as a complement to sector-agnostic relevance. 5, Alain mentioned it, acknowledging the importance of SMEs as key economic players and as part of the value chain in a proportionate manner to make sure that the economy as a whole is taking the necessary steps. And 6, which is dear to the heart of certain members of the OIBR, is the key importance of intangibles in value creation and in the sustainable development of entities. We don't want to discover that at the end of the day, what is not translated by financial reporting and what wouldn't be translated by sustainability reporting understood in a restrictive manner would be left aside. We feel that intangibles have to be onboarded in this approach. So a unique combination of foundations. Next slide, please. As regards the conceptual framework, which is the starting point for any standard setting, and in particular in the EU, and which has significant implications for the standards themselves. There is a need for conceptual guidelines, and what are the questions that need to be answered from an operational standpoint? The first one is how to align standards with public good. This is a question of political accountability. I mentioned it already. The second question is how to dramatically increase the quality of sustainability reporting to make sure that it is positioned on an equal footing with financial reporting. This is the second leg. If you have a big leg that is financial reporting and a weak leg that is sustainability reporting, it will not work properly. So that's the idea of bringing that to the right level. That means relevance, faithful representation, comparability, understandability, reliability, and quite frankly, this is not a given today. The third question is how to promote the forward-looking vision in addition to a retrospective approach. It is much expected but challenging from a standard setting perspective. The other question is how to cover the role of entities beyond their own operations under i.e. the operations under their control through their upstream and downstream value chain. This is difficult. Financial reporting has not tackled that because it's difficult. So it's a challenging question and you need to operationalize that. The next point is, of course, to operationalize the concept of double materiality, financial materiality and social and environmental materiality. This is a clear option in the EU, and both must be considered when standard setting. Not in a separate manner, but at the same time, since both materialities are relevant for most topics with different intensities at a given time and an evolution over time. And finally, how to promote the indispensable connectivity between financial and sustainability reporting, since corporate reporting is one and should be integrated. So these are the conceptual dimensions that the standard setter in the EU should take on board in order to work properly. Now, next slide, the target architecture. We recommend a comprehensive coverage of sustainability matters in accordance with what some observers have already called the rule of three. 3 layers of reporting in order to combine comparability and relevance on the left side of the slide. From sector agnostic, cascading down to sector specific, and finally to entity specific, in that order. On the right side, upper corner, 3 reporting areas following a logical decision-making and reporting cycle at entity level, from strategy to implementation and then to performance measurement. And 3 topics following the well-understood ESG approach: environmental, social, and what we call governance plus. On this point, it is necessary to go to subtopics to understand that we propose an extensive coverage, including intangibles with a link to a multi-capital approach, and to understand in particular the meaning of the somehow cryptic governance plus. In addition, we suggest to onboard digitization from day one and to locate standardized sustainability reporting in a separate section of the management report that could be called sustainability statements. So you would have the financial statements and the sustainability statements. I will not elaborate further in the interest of time. Let's go to more. Can you move ahead, please? Again. Yeah, here we are. The fourth element is the roadmap. The first-time application of the revised NFRD is expected to be 2024 on reporting year 2023. It is tomorrow. So this is tight, but there is a significant pressure on all sides. So it's urgent that, because the fragmentation of the market is not helpful at the moment, and we need to clarify and create a coherent landscape. Therefore, we propose a game-changing and yet pragmatic first set of standards before the end of 2022, combined with the progressive enhancement of context strategy through additional disclosures required under the following sets of standards as you can see on the slide. The first set should be coherent and reasonably comprehensive, should onboard best achievements, it's some sort of a consolidation, create appropriate data flows, in particular in the context of the sustainable finance agenda and other relevant EU policies, and address recognized priorities such as climate change, as it has been mentioned. Maybe a couple of words on cooperation at international level. We foresee significant possibilities. We feel the debate should not be about jurisdictional versus global standard setting, but about how to foster together progress through international convergence and jurisdictional impetus. The EU is willing to build on and contribute to international progress and convergence, while making sure its standard setting is aligned with its political agenda and the underlying concepts, both in terms of content and pace. The analysis we carried out shows there is valuable input available, but also, as to be expected, that there is room for improvement, complement, adaptation. From the discussions we've had with many under a potential co-construction approach, I am personally sure that it is possible to bring additional strength to the EU momentum, and that the EU can also help the global move to move more expeditiously. Maybe a few words. Jean-Paul Gauzès is not here to report on the governance structure. Maybe a few words on his behalf, if I may. As an observer, I was not part. It's an ad personam mandate. What is proposed is, if EFRAG is to be chosen as the standard setter, is to leave the financial reporting leg unchanged, no change, but to create another leg with a different mission statement, which would be to elaborate standards that would be submitted to the Commission remaining the ultimate decision maker via delegated acts. So the other leg, the sustainability reporting leg, would nevertheless mirror the organization of the current financial reporting leg with working groups, a technical expert group, and a board. This being, under the umbrella of an administrative board that would take the responsibility of the management of the organization as a whole, and under the control of a General Assembly that would be enlarged to take on board, the stakeholders that are relevant for sustainability reporting. In a summary, sorry, I've been long-winded maybe a little bit. Apologies for that. Laura, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Patrick, and no worries at all. Thanks a lot for providing us with such a clear overview of the report and also the positioning of EFRAG. I think that both you and Alana stress a very important point. That is, it's not about competition between the EU and the global and the international level, but it's about cooperation. So we are now moving and passing over to ESMA, and in particular to Alessandro. Alessandro, do you remember having a conversation with you right on this topic a couple of years ago in Brussels? So, and since then, there have been a lot of changes and evolutions. So what's the viewpoint of ESMA in this scenario?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be here today to represent ESMA as part of such a distinguished panel of speakers. I'm also thankful to Professor Lai and Professor Zambon for the invitation to this fourth annual conference of the Italian Foundation for Business Reporting. As some of you might know already, today is a special day for ESMA. We celebrate our 10th anniversary. And to bring a bit of that celebration here with you today, I would like to spend the next 15 minutes or so to focus my few remarks on what I believe are three recurring areas in ESMA's work in the past decade in the area of corporate reporting. Firstly, transparency in the interest of investor protection and financial stability. the consistency in reporting at European and international level, and also the independent and high-quality standard setting. I think that these three themes are useful lenses to address the complex question of this conference today on the regional versus global approach to standard setting in sustainability reporting. Let me start from transparency. In 2011, when ESMA moved its first steps into the European and international regulatory community, it built its experience on its predecessor body, the Committee of European Securities Regulators, the CSER. Back then, while in several areas of regulation, ESMA was requested to contribute to setting the standards, in the area of corporate reporting, there was already a commonly accepted set of standards, IFRS, which was already used, and therefore our main focus since then in this area is devoted to strengthening the consistent application of these international requirements across the Union, but also to coordinate the approach of the national securities regulators, and especially in critical situations such as the current COVID-19 crisis. In parallel with this work in the corporate reporting area, we have provided the views of EU regulators on the standard setting process and established fruitful and helpful cooperation with the IFRS Foundation at different levels, with which we share the common goal of establishing high-quality reporting standards. We've also contributed our views to the work of the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, the EFRAG, and most notably in the context of the endorsement process of new or amended IFRS. I have to say that this experience proved very useful when, back in 2017, the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, the NFRD, became applicable, and therefore European regulators had to start enforcing these new requirements without the comfort of clear reporting standards. In this respect, I want to highlight one coordination tool that has proved historically to be particularly useful in the area of financial reporting, and which we have then used in the area of non-financial reporting. That is the European Common Enforcement Priorities, a statement that we published towards October every year, with recommendations for the market on how to improve their sustainability, but also financial reporting practices. As I said, this experience has helped providing a first coordinated response to the reporting cycles immediately after the entry into force of the NFRD. But clearly the challenges of non-financial reporting have appeared immediately widely different compared to those in financial reporting. Our main focus on promoting investor protection and stability when it comes to non-financial reporting appeared much more complex given the widespread risk of greenwashing and ESG washing. And it became also clear that we had, in the area of non-financial reporting, we had to look in terms of what I would call the sustainable investment value chain, rather than looking at individual actors of this investment chain or individual users of corporate reports in this value chain. In this context, I would like to recall today a few interesting facts that can explain the interconnections between corporate reporting and various nodes of the investment value chain, and also that can explain the relevance and the pervasiveness of greenwashing and ESG washing as risks that require rapid action in terms of establishing or improving the disclosure requirements in this area. Firstly, the volume of the EU green bond market has now reached around 400 billion. This has also seen an increase in trends issuances, which have almost doubled in the course of 2020 compared to the previous year. And I also want to highlight an interesting trend here, that we have what I would call some returning customers to the green bond market in terms both of the type of issuers that we observe, but also the type of investors. This is a positive dynamic to see more experienced borrowers going to the market, but also seeing that investors are eager to invest in these asset classes. A similar dynamic is appearing in the area of social bonds, where we see an increasing interest, although in both areas, green bonds and social bonds, the level of liquidity compared to conventional bonds is still quite low. This obviously gives an idea of how much investors are attracted by green label. But even more than that, I want to signal a second aspect that has to do with the power of the mere ESG label. In the course of 2020, the total assets invested in ESG funds, both equity or bond funds or even mixed funds, reached a total of more than 800 billion, with an increase of 55% compared to the previous year, for a total amount covering around 11% of the total funds, both ESG and non-ESG. What's most interesting, though, is that when a traditional fund moves into an ESG strategy, there is quite a dramatic increase, almost 5 times more in terms of net inflows compared to the 10 months before the conversion of its strategy into an ESG one. So this gives the idea of how powerful is the signaling effect of an ESG label when it comes to the investment industry. Another piece of evidence I want to offer is about ESG ratings. Here, as you might be aware, ESMA has carefully looked into this issue and recently also written to the Commission to highlight the need for regulatory action in this area to ensure transparency. One of the things that is most striking here is that the level of divergence of ESG ratings is quite wide compared to credit ratings, where convergence in the assessments reaches somewhat close to 99%. Obviously, different ratings may take into account different factors and different methodology, but it is clear that part of the divergence has to do with the basic data source, the corporate reports based on which, along with other sources, ESG rating providers make up developed their assessments. Lastly, another piece of evidence that I think is very important has to do with the status of the fund industry. We did some research and looked at funds that are, I would say, tilted towards more polluting assets and how they behave or how resilient they are vis-a-vis climate risks compared to what I would call green funds, so funds which are more heavily invested in green assets. Well, the result of this analysis shows that the brown funds are disproportionately more affected by climate-related financial shocks than green funds, and that also brown funds have a wider system effect in terms of spreading financial shocks arising from climate risks. All these aspects I mentioned, so green bonds, social bonds, ESG ratings, the fund industry, each of these aspects of the sustainability investment chain have as their basic building block the corporate reports. And therefore, investors are increasingly looking for information that is comparable, relevant, verifiable, and timely, and in a word, information that is transparent. I will not spend now time to explain how large the gap is between these expectations and the status of the current NFRD. I think Alan has already expanded on that and explained a bit the direction of the NFRD review. Certainly, all factors point into the direction of the development of disclosure standards to address the growing need for better quality reporting. But this also puts strong emphasis on the need to ensure that these future reporting standards, if this is the direction that co-legislators will ultimately take, will have at their core the investor protection and financial stability perspective. At the same time, I want to also highlight that the trends I described in the sustainable finance industry clearly have to do with European trends, but also have an international reach. Just to give an example, when funds domiciled in the EU invest in companies, well, they do invest in companies all over the world, and therefore these underlying companies may be subject to disclosure regimes that are not necessarily equivalent to those of the EU, and this creates indirectly an issue for the European system. At the same time, I think we need to be clear that specific jurisdictions or regions may need to have their specific disclosure requirements in order to meet regional targets. I think about European targets, which reflect the European ambition in sustainability. And these targets need to be reflected perhaps on top of the requirements from the international standards. One example of these well-justified jurisdiction-specific disclosures are the recent requirements introduced by the taxonomy regulation. In particular, Article 8 of the taxonomy regulation will require already next year non-financial undertakings as well as financial institutions to disclose some key performance indicators that give the dimension to which these companies are taxonomy aligned. ESMA, together with EBA and EIOPA, have recently issued their advice to the Commission on the methodology and content of these disclosures. And I also want to take this opportunity because I know many market participants are following this event to encourage companies to familiarize themselves with the new requirements of the taxonomy regulation as soon as possible, given that these requirements will kick in very soon. The second point I want to make briefly is about the importance of consistent reporting at the European and international level. The development of a set of common disclosure standards will, as I said, definitely improve the level and quality of disclosures, and by definition will also result in disclosures which can be more comparable and consequently also more consistently supervised. Such consistency is also key to promote the creation of a stronger capital markets union. Obviously, there will be some learning curve necessary to achieving this consistency. And in this respect, I want to emphasize how much international convergence and consistency in terms of disclosure standards can help to support the rapid uptake of sustainability reporting in the EU. Here again, we have learned from the experience in the application of IFRS, which showed that the possibility of exchanging reporting experiences and practices around the globe creates a virtuous circle, whereby the implementation questions of one jurisdiction becomes the opportunity for other jurisdictions to improve their reporting practices, and which gives rise to a continuous improvement process. Again, this cooperation does not undermine the ability of the EU to pursue its own ambitions, but the availability of a common baseline of international standards on which then the EU can build would definitely help to improve the quality of reporting at a faster pace. Here, I would like to particularly commend the leading role that IOSCO, the International Organization of Securities Commissions, is taking to push for the development of international reporting standards in the field of sustainability. Let me then finally briefly touch upon the importance of ensuring that the standard setting process ensures that the standards are developed taking into account the views of all relevant stakeholders, but at the same time that the decision-making process is protected from the undue pressure of vested interest. Here I want to recall what I consider to be the bright example of the standard setting process at the IFRS Foundation, which over the years have established a track record of credibility and independence, which is widely regarded as a gold standard in terms of governance. In the EU, I can speak for the experience of ESMA. The development of technical standards is inspired by the principles of independence and wide outreach. The combination of these features ensures that the public interest remains at the center stage, and that at the same time, multiple stakeholders can have their voice heard via our public consultation or other forms of outreach. Whichever the governance process that will be established in the EU, if the decision is ultimately made to go for reporting standards, in my view, it is important to ensure that the public interest perspective has a clear role to play. Let me conclude by rapidly saying that I hope that with these remarks, I've provided a few hints on what are the challenges that, from ESMA's perspective, sustainability reporting has to face to ensure transparency across the entire sustainable investment value chain. Such challenges are international in nature, and therefore I would expect that they are more effectively addressed by reaching a solid baseline of international standards, and that the IFRS Foundation seems to be well placed to deliver on these tasks. However, again, regional standardization initiatives will also be needed to reflect specific public policy objectives for as long as necessary to reach international convergence on these public policy objectives too. It is my hope that going forward, pragmatism will drive international convergence in this area, and that in defining the European standard setting regime, the public interest will play a key role. From this perspective, ESMA's next decade has just started, and we look forward to support the standard setting work both at European and international level. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alessandro, for sharing with us the viewpoints of investors, and thank you also for celebrating with us the 10th anniversary of ESMA. So we're now moving to the global level, and in particular to the IFRS Foundation. Just yesterday, as you probably have seen, the IFRS Foundation trustees has announced a working group to accelerate convergence on sustainability reporting. So we're really pleased to now hear from the voice of Lucrezia Reiklin, who I said is an IFRS trustee, what's going on at the IFRS Foundation level on this topic.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the OIBR team for organizing this meeting. I'm speaking to you today as an IFRS Foundation trustee and chair of our steering committee overseeing the establishment of a potential sustainability standard board under the governance of the IFRS Foundation. A lot has been said, so let me give you some information about the process so far, what the IFRS has done so far, and how it intends to proceed from now on. So some context first. In September last year, we published a consultation paper exploring how the foundation might contribute to the development of a global sustainability standard. The motivation for us getting into this is, as it has been pointed out by Alessandro, is the experience, for more than 20 years of the foundation in international standard setting, is global relationship, and a well-established due process and governance structure, which includes, and this is for me is key, public interest oversight of security regulators globally. So the pre-consultation work that we had done leading to the official consultation had actually encouraged us to go into this direction. Now, the consultation was a great success. So we received 576 responses from a broad range of stakeholders, including, many of you, participating to this conference today. Importantly, we also got responses from important global institutions overseeing, the global financial architecture. I'm here talking about the FSB and, of course, the IOSCO, but also the IMF, the World Bank, etc. So the response overwhelming supported, voice an urgent demand to improve the global consistency and comparability in sustainability reporting. This has already been said today. This is perceived to be as a very urgent task. And also the consultation supported broadly the idea that the IFRS Foundation should play a role in this consolidation process. So given the level of support and given the call for urgency, so we kind of moved on. So the trustees have approved, a working plan, try to explore, the feasibility, the risk, and so on of moving in the direction of establishing a sustainability board under the umbrella of the IFRS. And then 2 weeks ago, we set out the strategic directions. And then yesterday, we issued this communique outlining, the more practical work that we intend to do from now until COP26, where hopefully we will be in the position of announcing the new board. So let me just talk to you about the 4 strategic directions, and then I'll tell you a bit more about the working group. So the strategic direction number 1 is that the new board will focus on information that is material to the decision of investors. And here the key is investors, lenders, and other creditors. Okay, so as we know, in Europe in particular, we are a bank-based financial system. So, when we talk about investors, we have to intend this as a broader, group of financial stakeholders. So here, I think, there has been a lot of discussion about these issues of single materiality, double materiality, and so on. So let me just try to clarify the way in which we see that and trying to move on from this kind of big distinction between single and double materiality. Our key concept is to develop standards that address enterprise value. And so this means the expected value creation in the short, medium, and long term. So not only in the short term, but also in the long term. We believe that this concept serves the public interest of reporting standard and addresses significant part of the societal concern with the impact on broad stakeholders and the environment. And so, let me stress here that this idea of enterprise value, so the enterprise value perspectives, includes to a certain extent this double materiality concept, which is pushed by the EU and by others. So in other words, the idea that the company's impact on its stakeholders in turn affect its own risk and opportunities, this idea is embedded in the enterprise value concept. So the kind of rebound effect that sometimes Patrick has been talking about in this context. So if a company's impact on stakeholders is significant to stakeholders, so this may create risk or opportunity for the business, if not today, in the future. So the idea of focusing also in the long term is also important. So there is substantial overlap between the two concepts of single and double materiality. So I think that this has to be recognized. This is probably particularly true for climate, maybe less so for other aspects of the ESG. Now, the second strategic direction is that we will, given the urgency, we will start with climate. Although, and this is actually came clear from the consultation that there is an urgent need to proceed with climate-related standards, although most of the responses also recognize the importance of and the interconnectedness between the different, aspects of sustainability, the E, the S, and the G. So our decision is to move with climate first, but leave the door open to develop, to go broader in scope in a second step. The third strategic decision is this idea of, we are committed to sort of a building on existing framework. So we don't start from scratch. We don't start from a desert. So the new board will build upon the well-established work of the Financial Stability Board's Task Force of Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the TCFD, as well as the work by the leading sustainability standard setting initiatives focused on enterprise value. And we are about to initiate a process of structured engagement with the relevant organization. So to make sure that we are not just an addition to the alphabet soup, as has been said, but we're actually going to lead a process of consolidation, which would be centralized to a certain extent. Finally, the fourth strategic direction, and this is very important for the discussion this morning, is the objective to come with a global solution. And so because, investors are global and, Alessandro could have not been more explicit on the challenges that the global capital market is facing today with this kind of, greenwashing and, heterogeneity of standards and so on. So we really need to strive for a global solution. And but this global solution has to be congruent with the regional initiatives. So we recognize that heterogeneity at the jurisdictional level, it's inevitable, also because legal frameworks, public policy differs. However, the capital market is global, so that we need to have an approach which is consistent with these different desiderata. And So again, here we are talking about building block. Now we have building blocks all over the place in this discussion. So let's be, by building block in this area means to have a core of global standards on the basis of which jurisdictions can top up with more, ambitious goals. And also to have a structure of collaboration and exchange of information, which, building on the experience of the FRS on financial reporting will help a process of convergence, which inevitably, will be dynamic. So in this respect, we are committed to working with key jurisdictions, but also to coordinate, on jurisdictions specific and not only on key jurisdictions, but also to have to build up on our governance. To also hear the concerns from a multi-stakeholders community. What do I have to say more about on these building blocks? So in a way, the IFRS Foundation, with our public interest oversight of security regulators across jurisdictions, necessarily, for legitimacy reasons, will have to focus on investors, which are our key stakeholders. We know this also, that this is what many of the European investors want. And, the European investors want a global solution for the reasons which have already been mentioned. And the security regulators want too. So we are very much supported by the IOSCO and also ESMA in that respect. So this is, for these reasons, we have to create a solution that meets the needs of investors globally, including the European investors. And of course, the key questions will be how can we cooperate and coordinate so that this global solution forms a part of the overall solution in the EU. Now, moving forward, as you know, yesterday we issued a press release which announced, how we want to move forward in the expectation of that in November at the COP26 meeting we can make some announcement. And in particular, we want to form two groups. The first group relates to this concept of building block approach. So we will work with IOSCO to explore the establishment of a multi-stakeholder expert consultative committee within the FRS Foundation structure. So this ideally will be a permanent feature of our governance, in the steady state. And such committee could help the Sustainability Standard Board to identify sustainability topics that may be material to enterprise value, but also support mechanisms to coordinate investors' information need on wider sustainability impacts, as well as facilitating, coordinating, promoting consistency in complementary jurisdiction-specific reporting standards. Here I want to stress that this multi-stakeholder committee mechanism acknowledges and addresses the crossover in the design of a potential standard board under FRS Foundation, so this double materiality aspect. Now, the second group, it's a working group that will help us to build upon the work of the TCFD and the other global and the other sustainability reporting initiatives. So we are moving into a phase of a structured engagement. To incorporate the technical observations, to converge on some kind of general principles, to give a running start in the development of the new sustainability board. And, the IOSCO, given its essential role, will also participate, to this group. Now, we want to emphasize here that both working groups welcome the engagement with important jurisdictions, the EU in particular, given the function that and the role that the EU plays in the IFRS, but not only. And but of course, I want to stress that the engagement with the European Commission and IFRAG is very important in this context. So let me conclude by saying that these are really exciting times for sustainability reporting. A lot has happened, from all sides, jurisdictions, but also international organizations. So let me say that a year ago when, actually more than a year ago when we started this work, I would have not, hoped for such, support from, ISB and other international organizations. Also, I think there is an increased momentum in countries in commitment to zero emissions for many reasons. So we are quite more optimistic on what COP26 in November will be able to achieve in terms of providing global cooperation for addressing issues of climate change with different tools. And reporting is one of these tools, okay? It's not the only tool, so it's just one of these tools. It's very important, but it's just one of them. Now, of course, the work will be challenging, both at the political level and at the technical level. And also, we should not stop with climate. So we are aware that, there is a big and rich agenda ahead. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to describe our work. And I conclude here.
Thanks a lot, Lucrezia, for making such important clarifications on some of the fundamental topics that the IFRS Foundation is going through, and also with sharing with us the plans and the way forward. So we're now quite close to the conclusion, but before that, I would like to give the word to our discussant, Vera Palea, who is also chair of the Sustainability Committee of one of the largest private asset management company in Italy, and a member of the European Law Institute Research Group on Business and Financial Law. So please, Vera, what could you tell us? What's your view on the speeches that we have heard this morning?
Okay, Thank you, Laura, and thank you very much to the distinguished panelists for the very interesting considerations. Given the institutional perspective of this session, I will also adopt a broader approach to the discussion between regional versus international approaches to corporate reporting, which considers sustainability reporting within the specific European Union institutional environment in which it will operate. This approach necessarily acknowledges the interdependence between the economy and the polity. With the action plan on sustainable finance, the new Green Deal, the Next Generation EU, sustainability reporting in the European Union has clearly become a powerful economic policy tool. Corporate reporting is now one important piece of a broad industrial policy aimed at reorienting the whole productive system towards economic, social, and environmental sustainability. Sustainability, however, is not just an objective of this specific commission. Sustainability represents the raison d'etre of the European Union, its common good as set out by the treaties on the European Union. In fact, in Article 3 of the Treaty on the European Union sets sustainable development and social market economy as the founding goals of the European Union, with social market economy emphasizing the social dimension of the European project. So, not only environment, but also a strong focus on social welfare. These objectives represent the European common goods and require a collective effort to be realized. Such objectives are further enforced by the so-called social clause that the European Union must observe in its policies. According to the social clause, all societal stakeholders and their interests are on the same level, from capital providers to employees to consumers. These institutional principles, we all know, were the results of a long debate on the future of the European Union, which started in 2001 with the Laeken Council and defined the economic and social model that the EU would pursue, along with the powers which were to be transferred to the European Union. By the way, there is now a new conference on the future of the Europe, which will further discuss and will probably, I would say, hopefully lead to more progressive positions on environmental and social sustainability issues. Importantly for this discussion, according to law hierarchy, the treaty's principles rank higher than any regulation and directive, which must comply with these objectives. And the ranking is very substantial, as the European Court of Justice oversees its implementation and can invalidate regulations endangering these goals. Along the same lines, corporate reporting must be consistent with the principles I have just mentioned. And the same story we will see holds for for standard setters governance. So I come to the point. What are the practical implications of the treaty's requirement for corporate reporting regulations? Well, it's easy. Let us now consider, for instance, double materiality, which has long been discussed. Well, double materiality is the only possible option, the only perspective consistent with the social clause. According to the treaty, investor perspective is not exhaustive of all the different interests in society. Investors have no priority, neither in the social market economics model nor in the social clause. Against this institutional background, a regional approach would make it easier to define those corporate reporting rules needed to implement the European Union's societal principles. For instance, as Alessandro Deri has underlined, there is an urgent need for corporate reporting of investees to be aligned with the taxonomy to make the sustainable finance disclosure regulation works. In this respect, a regional approach would give the European Union that so-called strategic autonomy needed to be effective and efficient in its actions. And this is understandable also considering the very little time left for reorienting the system towards sustainability. One last comment is on the governance of the new standard setters and refers to the regulatory capture issue. Regulatory capture is one key issue in the financial domain, and there is no reason to think that corporate reporting would be an exceptional case. Academic literature reports unequivocal evidence that the financial regulator is the most exposed to corporate lobbying. Given the issues at stake, this is quite a big risk. We can already see with the taxonomy some pressure from the industry and the gas, from the energy and gas industry to weaken it. Quite often, EFRAG and also other organizations uses the notion of public interest and public good interchangeably. But in political theory, the notion of public interest is something different from the public good and even more from the common good. Differences among these concepts are not just an academic matter, they are substantial as they legitimate alternative forms of governance. Public interest grounds in utilitarianism and refers to the pursuit of the advantage of the vast majority of individuals who join together for private interests. As such, public interest does not necessarily deliver to social welfare, which is a common good. On the contrary, the new corporate reporting standard setter is called to play a key role in supporting broader societal objectives, such as sustainable development, which extend beyond the realm of the public interest into the realm of the common goods. Accordingly, complete funding, similar to what exists for ESAs, instead of a mix of public and private funding from business organizations, also in kind with secondment, would represent one important step for limiting potential capture and lobbying phenomena. Given the new standard setter's budget, this would not be a big issue for the European Union compared to the immensely greater advantages. Time runs fast, so I will stop here due to time constraint, but I will be very happy to further discuss these issues in the future if needed. So for now, thank you very much for your attention, and thank you, Laura.
Thanks a lot, Vera, and thanks a lot to all our speakers. I'll just wrap up and try to summarize the very interesting speeches and discussion that we had during this first session this morning. So we'll be hearing that actually these two approaches are not that different. We'll be hearing very similar concepts. We've been hearing talking about the importance of verifiability, of comparability, the focus of investor protection, and also, as Lucrezia rightly mentioned, also the building block approach. So we can share that actually, yes, the two different approaches remain, as Alain and Patrick and Alessandro mentioned. There are some specificities that have to be dealt with at the regional level. But notwithstanding that, there is the importance, the very importance of the global adoption, because at the end of the day, investors and companies are acting on a global level. So I just would like to thank our distinguished speakers. So please do virtually join me, all of you who are joining us today, in thanking all our speakers. Before launching the coffee break, I just would like to say that right after we will be hearing our keynote speaker, who is Mervyn King, and right after we will be hearing the voices of Standard Set and the Framework Developer Organization. So please don't leave the conference. There's still a lot to be said and a lot to be heard. So just very 15 minutes for a coffee or a glass of wine, and then we'll be right back. Thanks a lot.
Good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. I'm the chair of the supervisory board of the OIBR Foundation, and I believe that today we can have a very interesting map of what is going on about non-financial reporting at the moment, and it's a lot. I would like to be part of it's a pleasure to invite to the it's a pleasure, sorry, I can hear something wrong. I try again, sorry. I had a very noisy in my back, but I would like to introduce a very distinguished speaker. It's an honor to have Mervyn King, Chair Emeritus of the Value Reporting Foundation, with us today. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much to be with us.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and good day to lots of colleagues and friends that are now online. And thank you for asking me to speak today on the critical issue of where non-financial reporting is going to at this critical time of our globe. Well, to start with, let's go back to Brundtland in 1987, when it was said that for sustainable development to take place, we need to look at the three critical dimensions of the economy, the environment, and society to try and endeavor to ensure that there is a sustainable planet for those who come after us. We, at the end of the 20th century, through expedited research with the computer age from the 1970s, were able to empirically establish that we'd reached ecological overshoot. In the main, the limited liability company was using natural assets faster than nature was regenerating them. Clearly not a sustainable issue. And by the end of the 20th century, it was also established that the makeup of the market capitalization of companies, only about 20% of that was represented in a balance sheet according to financial reporting standards, be they IFRS or US GAAP. So some guidance was needed on reporting on these, what became known as non-financial issues, and then morphed into, how we know it today, into ESG issues. And that guidance came from the GRI. The GRI focused on these issues through a civil society lens. And I speak on an informed basis because I was the chairman of the United Nations on Governance and Oversight, and also chairman of the GRI. So on that informed basis, we know that the GRI looked at the impacts of how a company makes its money, its activities, and its product or its service has on the three critical dimensions for sustainable development: the economy, the environment, and society. But as we moved through the first 2 decades of the 21st century, particularly during the last decade, we realized that these three critical dimensions in turn have an impact on the most important citizen in both developed and developing countries, and that's the limited liability company, because it is the chosen medium through which business is conducted, the chosen medium through which capital is raised, jobs are created, etc. And the impact from an economic point of view, an example was the collapse of Lehman Brothers had a huge impact on companies. Socially, well, the pandemic of 2020, health and safety regulations, lockdowns, restrictions, socially, huge impact on companies. And then environmentally, I just mentioned climate change. So the impacts on companies were on their financial condition, their balance sheet, on their operating performance, the income statements and the cash flow, and on the risk profile, the cost of capital and the market capitalization of companies. This enterprise value creation, preservation, and erosion thinking started taking hold in the last 10 years. And as we've heard from the speakers this morning, we know that there was an overwhelming response to the consultation paper of the IFRS. We know as well that when the question arose as to when all this should happen, there was an answer to that question. It's urgent, it has to be done now. What has to be done? What has to be done is to create a sustainability standards board that has consistency and the rigor which financial reporting has through the IASB under the oversight of the IFRS, and with informed comparability instead of the diluted comparability we have. What happened in the 2 decades of the 21st century is that the ESG space became more important than the financial reporting space. And so we had this myriad of framework providers developing, causing clutter and confusion, overlapping. For preparers and users, it diluted comparability. At the IRC, of which I was the chairman, our chair emeritus, we started the corporate reporting dialogue to try and get these framework providers in one room and try and get them to harmonize their standards in the long-term better interest of all on our planet. Well, we made little progress. In March 2019, fortuitously, I was the speaker as chair of the IRC at an international conference in London, where I had the executives of the alphabet soup before me, from SASB, GRI, TCFD, CDSB, CDP, etc., etc. And I took the opportunity to say that you're all dealing with public interest issues, and yet you see yourselves as competitors, which is a social outrage. Because you're dealing with public interest issues with the same public good outcome, namely to make reporting more informed, because reporting is the lifeblood of accountability. And the more informed your reporting is, the more transparent is your accountability. And the outrage is exacerbated because you're all fishing from the same pond from a financing point of view. And the time has come to collaborate. In 2015, SDGs were passed by 193 countries, and SDG 17, the most important in my judgment, is collaboration and cooperation. And we saw it happening now during the 2020 in the race to obtain a vaccine to try and attack and stop the spread of this pandemic on our globe. So collaboration and cooperation is critical. The who to do this became clear with this massive response to the consultation paper, and the who is the IFRS Foundation, who obviously has to expand its mandate to include these sustainability issues. And as Lucretia and others pointed out this morning, that we can fully expect that the Sustainability Standards Board will be focusing on enterprise value creation, preservation, and erosion. In other words, looking at it through the lens of enterprise value, the impacts which the 3 critical dimensions of environment, society, and the economy have on the limited liability company. So when they announced their collaboration, these members of the alphabet soup, there were 3 boxes in their statement of intent. The biggest box was GRI, looking through a civil society lens, that there may be in reporting in future following the SSB standards, that there might be something that is important to particular stakeholders, so the GRI standard will be used. But it will have no financial impact from a point of view of investors and the providers of financial capital, nor will it necessarily have an impact on the financial condition, the balance sheet, the operating performance, and the risk profile of the company. But in time, it may be. But the focus will be on EVC, enterprise value creation, in the standards to be developed over the next few years in the SSB, which hopefully, as we all know, should be announced at Glasgow in November of this year. So what is it we need? We desperately need consistent, with rigor, this reporting on sustainability standards, the same as we have consistency and rigor on financial reporting standards. And we need to have standards which are consistent to improve the comparability, which became diffused because of the spread of framework providers. So let me just conclude by saying this, that we have reached a stage where the one danger is that we forget the final goal, the final vision, the final objective is to have a simplified global corporate reporting system which is consistent and allows comparability with rigor. And for this, we must take great care of fragmentation. So I say, I plead with the EC on its non-financial reporting directives to work with, and that the IFRS in establishing the SSB standards works together with, for example, the NFRD to align these standards. So we take it as a big stepping stone towards this vision at the end of a global corporate reporting system. I remember Mr. Mandela, who said that action without vision is wasting time. Vision without action is daydreaming. But vision with action can change the world. Vision with action in the area we're talking about, the non-financial aspects, which from a market capitalization point of view and the raising of funds point of view have become more important than financial issues. We need to move now on a collaborative basis with never losing sight of that end goal of a global corporate reporting system. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, you, Mervyn King. It has been a strong invitation to all our next panelists to do every effort to can work together to define just one standard, how Professor King said. Now I would like to invite our kindly guest that has accepted our invitation to afford really going deeper in the different standard, the approach to the pathway to the standardization of non-financial information. So I would like to invite Eric Dugelay, of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. Then we will have also Charles Stiles, CEO of the IARC, Janine Goulot, CEO of the SASB, and Eelco van der Enden, board member of the GRI. Takayuki Sumita, chair of the Global Network, Wiki, and Veronica Poole of the Group of Five. Then we will finish with discuss with our discussant Stefano Zambon, our General Secretary of the Foundation and really expert on this theme. Now I would like to see with you the question that we propose to our guests, if it's possible to have the slide, because we definitely have some important points that are to be afforded in this debate. One is the possibility that a regional approach could live together with tentative global approach. That is what came out this morning from the first roundtable. And if is there a concrete risk of misalignment and misunderstanding, and how can this be avoided? The second one is if do you think that the standardization process should regard only sustainability information or the broader value creation? More in general, what is your idea of sustainability? Today in the EFRAG has been very make the point about the importance of also other aspect of non-financial, how to combine the vision of sustainability referring to wider stakeholder in society, and that looking primarily at investor and their decision making. Also, this point has been touched by the previous speakers. And if it is generally agreed that materiality should inform sustainability reporting and management action, that is the specific interpretation of this notion by your organization, financial, nested, dynamic, double, reform or IRC version. We will have also about this aspect some input from the previous roundtable. Now it's a pleasure to have with us Takayuki Sumita for the first speaker. Please.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. My name is Takayuki Sumita, the chair of Wiki Global Network. I'd like to thank you very much for your invitation to this excellent roundtable, and congratulations on the hosting of this OIBR roundtable. I will comply with the sequence of the questions raised. As to the first question, my answer is quite simple. Regional approach should live together with global approaches in order to avoid increase in the cost of disclosure for companies and the confusion for users of reporting reports, including investors, analysts, and other stakeholders. To do so, we need to establish a common basis of sustainability reporting as a global consensus based on which each jurisdiction can attach some additional requirements responding to local needs. The issue is how to realize it. This challenge is closely related to the common understandings on basic ideas touched upon question 2 and question 3. Concerning the question 2, in the standardization process, ample attention should be paid to broader value creation. And concerning the meanings of sustainability, we should recognize that sustainability is not related only to social or environmental issues, but also to the economy. Without economic sustainability, including the sustained existence of the company, we cannot expect any activities of companies which may have some positive impacts on sustainability of the society and the environment. In such a way, sustainability is an important idea which covers business, human, or community, and the earth. Then, how does sustainability information relate to the value creation? The key lies in intangibles, I believe. Concerning this point, the report EFLAG successfully issued this month explained in details that intangibles are recognized as a key factor for business development and corporate value creation, as well as for sustainable development and materiality, including impact materiality. For many people, intangibles are seen as ESG matters. However, intangibles include not only environmental or social elements, which usually relates to the risk side of company activities, but also those with positive externalities. For example, technologies, wisdom, corporate discipline, accumulated digitalized data, reputation, reliable supply chain, trust with customers, human capabilities, product quality are typical intangibles. Please take a look at this the first page of this slide. You can see in the left-hand side, capitals or resources. Some of them falls in the category of intangibles. This chart is based on this left-hand side chart is based on the IRC's integrated reporting framework. And companies utilize these resources and convert them into outcome through their business model or activities. And after that, the business activities or outputs will lead to some outcomes or values. Then, this is not the end of the story. Then, this kind of outcomes will have some very big impact on economy, society, and environment. This is a very important point. This is illustrated in the blue arrows in the middle of this chart. The outcomes or values have some impact to economy, society, and environment. The composition of the intangibles is the origin of the differentiation of created values of the company from others. And in such a sense, this is the key to the impact to society, economy, and environment. In such a sense, created value characterized by intangibles has strong connection to sustainability. Wiki, as a pioneer in intangibles, is willing to contribute to future standard setting activities on sustainability reporting combined with value creation. In the possible contribution, Wiki can utilize its unique both invisible assets such as human network and knowledge related to intangibles and visible assets. Certainly, through the activities for more than a decade, Wiki accumulated various achievements, including Wiki Intangibles Reporting Framework, which is compatible with Integrated Reporting Framework. And second, the general KPIs together with industry-specific KPIs. Third, a guidance on how CFOs can deal with intangibles. And fourth, reporting framework for SMEs or simplified and visualized version called Business Management Design Sheet, and so on. This point is also closely related to question 3. Concerning the question 3, to tackle the challenge of the different visions, we should notice that both visions are focusing on values created by companies. Therefore, more attention should be paid to intangibles as a key factor for value creations. If companies can well understand intangibles and well grasp and utilize, disclose, and explain the intangibles in the context of company's value creation story, then both visions may get closer. In other words, intangibles can link the financial reporting and sustainability reporting. Go back to the first slide. When you can take a look at the right-hand side of this slide, you can see 2 ovals. First one is the light green one, and second one is the yellow ones. Maybe the sustainability reporting mentioned by European Commission or EFLAG is mainly covers the yellow part. Maybe this is the vision of sustainability referring to wider stakeholder and society. On the other hand, the upper side oval is the vision looking primarily at investors and their decision making. I understand that this is the sustainability related financial disclosure posed by five organizations or Value Reporting Foundation, focusing on financial aspects of the created value or the impact to the sustainability. Maybe the interest of the IFRS is very similar to this. Most important point is illustrated in the thin yellow arrows, 3 arrows, yellow or yellow green, right green arrows in the middle, which comes from economy, society, and environment to the value. Some part of the impact to society and environment may come back again to the financial value of the company, maybe after a while, through the evaluation of stakeholders on those impacts. In such a way, some part of the impact on sustainability may affect, again, the decision-making of investors. This is quite important point. The more part of the impact comes back to corporate financial value, the more both visions overlap. If you agree, this chart well illustrates the current situation, then the gap between the two may not be so big nor serious. The current situation where more investors pay attention to sustainability issues, as Mr. Marvin King mentioned, is quite good timing for two visions to be combined. And finally, concerning the question 4, as I mentioned, the created value has impacts on both economic, social, and environmental aspects. So every company has some idea on desirable combination of those 3 impacts. How to combine those 3 is the key to materiality for a company. In such a sense, materiality should be based on the value creation mechanism of each company. Moreover, the company's intention on the combination of the 3 may change over time according to the external environment and other situation. The idea of nested and dynamic materiality seems to work well. Finally, I'd like to stress again that intangibles or their combinations are not only the origin of financial values for the company, but may also have sufficient impact on the society and environment. In such a sense, intangibles can play a key role to bridge finance and sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Samita-san. We start with a very open approach to the difference. And now we start to go deeper and deeper in the question. It's my pleasure to share the floor with Chair Steele, CEO of the International Integrated Reporting Council. Thanks a lot to have been here with us today.
Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting me, and good day to everybody. It's really good to be here and have the opportunity of taking part in this discussion. It's less than 50 years since we've seen the massive shift in the way that people think about the value of companies. In 1975, 83% of the value of the business was on the balance sheet. So the financial information told most of the story. Today, 2020, that figure is less than 10%, an extraordinary change as per the Ocean Tomo survey. There's the value today is that considerable value in brand, the values of the organization, the processes and platforms and reputational risk that the organization creates. And so, and Mervyn King has said this many times, no business is an island. It's part of society. It's not apart from society. It needs to think about its license to operate, its contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. And all of that is then falls into, I think, what Sumita-san would have been referencing there as intellectual capital. So for me, this change is really driving the reporting system catching up. We're seeing now rapid movement, as we've already heard this morning, and we're looking for a system which delivers reliable, adaptable, and assurable information, which is relevant to enterprise value creation. It's relevant to sustainable development and the evolving expectations of business. And what we have at the moment is a pretty fragmented approach. It's one which is perpetuating inefficiency, increased costs for business, and also ultimately a lack of trust. So this huge progress that we're seeing with the World Economic Forum and its International Business Council metrics, the alignment between leading reporting initiatives, including ourselves and SASB, the work of EFRAG, the very, very welcome consultation and the support for that consultation of the IFRS and the support by IOSCO of that solution are all excellent. They're all about getting the system right, and it's obviously a very urgent issue. Investors, want an understanding of how a company creates value. What are those drivers of value? What are the reputational risks and potential costs in the future? And of course, wider society wants to understand how a company is impacting both positively and negatively on the economy, the people, and planet. And everybody is looking for accountability. They're looking for a significant understanding of how the organization operates. But there is I think a really important issue to address here is the fact that the difference between what the company does and what society wants, there are great interdependencies. As I said, a business is not an island. So we're looking for quality reporting, and that's what we at the International Integrated Reporting Council, the IRC, had as our purpose in promoting prosperity for all and to protect our planet, and also in terms of our vision. And I'll quote, it's a world in which capital allocation and corporate behavior are aligned to the wider goals of financial stability and sustainability through the cycle of integrated reporting and thinking. And for me, that applies to all companies, including those in the public sector. And personally, I find this way of thinking a very important tool in terms of thinking about that long-term sustainability. So what does a comprehensive reporting system look like? Well, it's obviously an opportunity for a company to tell its story to its key stakeholders, the people it has strong relationships with. It's talking about how it has performed to date in terms of its purpose, its values, its strategy, how it's implemented that strategy through its business model, and therefore its outputs, and most importantly, the outcomes in terms of achieving that purpose. But it's also very important to be thinking about the future. What are the opportunities and risks to that business model? And that is critical in terms of understanding what's happening in the external environment. So a trusted system requires independent processes in the public interest. It requires a framework providing the concepts, principles, and guidelines for the system, an integrated system. An organization isn't run in silos, it's run on an integrated basis. We need the same from a reporting point of view. And of course, having the right metrics to be able to demonstrate how a company is achieving its outcomes. I think it's also important to think that the reporting is not there alone. It's part of an ecosystem. And in the IFAC paper, which was produced last September, which I think is excellent, they identify the following, which I would really, we need to think about all these things together. So corporate governance covering all of the reporting obligations, the right controls and data systems, and that data and having the right metrics is incredibly challenging, but we need that to get quality information. We need assurance to build trust, and digitization is going to be is critical as well to get that efficiency in terms of how companies prepare their data. Now, if we're moving to a wider role in terms of the way a company is reporting, then the skills, particularly in the business, but also of the assurers, has got to be widened, and we also need to think about ratings and so forth. All these matters are crucial to building trust and transparency. But the really important issue here is that you get this right. It is actually does lead, and we've been hearing a bit of this morning, to a lower cost of capital, including from a debt perspective for those companies that are addressing these issues effectively. So we've got the momentum. We mustn't waste it. We've got, however, still too many initiatives. So we really need to focus on that convergence. And it was certainly very good to hear earlier today Alan Decker saying that they're supporting both an international focus and a convergence focus, despite obviously the need to comply with EU law. And our merger, the merger of the IRC with SASB, is very much focused on accelerating that progress to convergence. At the heart of this alignment, I think, is the architecture. It's a central issue which, to me, supports the building block approach. And it's about how you link financial and sustainability reporting, the integration. So the alignment of how we bring together all of the different ways we think about the business across all of the key relationships, what we call capitals at the IRC, and then align the standards of SASB, the TCFD, CDSB, World Economic Forum, and we've just heard from Wiki as well. And that needs to be aligned with the international accounting standards and, for that matter, US standards as well. And this link needs to be on a global basis. From an international perspective, we've got global trade, we have global supply chains, climate is global. We need that international focus. At the same time, the system needs to accommodate supplemental jurisdictional requirements. So to support that local public accountability, whether that be at a country level or at a regional level, such as in the EU. And I think at the heart of all this is what is material. What is material to important to enterprise value creation, but also to wider society. And in the work that we've done with other standard setters, as the Group of Five, or I think we're now called the Alliance, we've looked at the concept of dynamic materiality, which I really do think has moved the agenda forwards. And it's about the fundamentals of the sustainability of the company, and how that external environment is going to impact upon its future business model. What are the new opportunities and risks? So stage one in any company is understanding your value and your impacts upon the organizations that you have your key relationships with, whether they be customers, employees, society, the natural environment. And then stage two is how the company allocates those resources to addressing those opportunities, those risks. Now, time, societal change, technology driving dynamism for enterprise is driving that dynamism for enterprise value creation. And the challenge all the time in terms of the integration across any company is getting those trade-offs right. Now, this is described as double materiality, but I think it's always been the basis of how you think about how you run your organization. If you're really thinking about your long-term sustainability, which takes me to the timescale point and the timescale of the business model. The longer you are thinking about your organization, then the more closely aligned the sustainability of the company is to meeting the needs of society and the sustainability development goals. So if you're an asset manager from a pension fund, you're thinking long term, you want your companies to do the same. And in this week's Sunday Times, James Timpson, who writes a regular column now and runs a chain of 2,500 shops in the UK, one of the things he was saying is, care for your people and the financial benefits follow. And I think however in caring for all of your relationships, that is critical. And it's important that we challenge the short-term culture. So the IFRS Foundation, which we're very supportive of their consultation, as everybody else has been, is now going to set up the SSB. It's got terrific support from IOSCO. The key issues are the remit, which we've heard this morning, is the sustainability, the climate first, but then widening to all of sustainability, which is excellent. The integration of sustainability and financial reporting is a really important issue, as I've already talked about. And then how is it going to deal with this? And we certainly at the IRC very much welcome the announcement yesterday of the setting up the working group to accelerate that convergence, and we're delighted to be a part of that. So we've got to get this right. The time is now. We need to act with speed, urgency. It's for the benefit of investors, companies, wider society. And we're looking, I think, for a global and international solution, which at the same time meets the political agendas with regard to local society. But we do need to do that in the public interest. There are significant risks out there from a political perspective still, and there are still many, many new initiatives happening. But just to very quickly then say, well, how does this answer the questions? I hope it has answered the questions, but just to say, can regional approaches live together with global approaches? Absolutely they can. They must do it. Fits into that dynamic materiality. Do you think that the standardization process should regard only sustainable information? Absolutely not. A company is run on the basis of how it creates value for its key stakeholders and relationships, and that creates financial outcomes. They need to be brought together. How do you combine the vision of sustainability referring to wider stakeholders in society? They're getting closer and closer together, and I think we're just going to continue to see that. Reputational risk is a huge issue out there, and if companies aren't thinking about that, they get blindsided very quickly. If it is generally agreed that materiality should inform sustainability, how does that work? Well, for me, that double materiality, the way I described it, understanding the value you're creating, and then how are you going to allocate your resources to create further opportunity, mitigate risk is critical. And I hope I've described how I see that architecture, but it's critical that it's about convergence. So to conclude, huge opportunity to achieve that well-structured, principled, comprehensive suite of frameworks and standards. It's got to provide relevant and assured information for investors, but also in the public interest. We need to do it with speed. And to do that, we're going to need commitment and leadership from all of us involved, of which we're obviously very happy to commit. So with that, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Thiele, for your contribution and for your strong appeal to cooperate and work together. After have developed more the concept of intangible, now we have got the approach to risk, and especially with the strong concentration on risk reputation. And now I will give the floor to Veronica Poole, co-facilitator of the group of 5 in global FIRs and corporate reporting from Deloitte. Thanks a lot to be here with us today.
Thank you, and thank you for your kind introduction. I would like to offer, first of all, congratulations on assembling such an impressive lineup of speakers. And I speak to you today from a couple of perspectives. One is that facilitator of the work of the group of 5, that is trying to get us to the convergence, but also as a partner at Deloitte, leading on accounting and corporate reporting matters, as a practitioner. So just over 2 years ago, Accountancy Europe published a report setting out a vision for interconnected standard setting as part of its Cogito series. And this was the output of a task force that I chaired at the time. That report produced a vision for corporate reporting foundation to oversee standard setting that comprehensively addresses both financial and non-financial information. And we asked stakeholders for feedback on this proposal. The responses that we got back confirmed universal agreement that we need to move towards a system solution to achieve global standards. And the feedback was consistent in that it was saying that when we build this system, we need to build it in steps and we need to build it in blocks. But every step we make and every building block we add should be taking us to the right direction. And it's very interesting for me to hear that the concept of building blocks has been used pretty much by every speaker so far. Since then, I have been privileged very much to be working with the leading sustainability standard setters, facilitating the work of what has become that group of 5, building on the proposals from Accountancy Europe Cogito paper. And what is interesting, of course, to me, is that all of these sustainability standard setters and framework providers passionately believe that their standards and frameworks can help us to get to this comprehensive corporate reporting system. And I agree with them. There is already good material for us to start from. So since we started our work, so much has happened in the world of sustainability standard setting that I have to use this famous quote here. There are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. And it feels like this is exactly what we have seen with the moves by the IFRS Foundation, IOSCO, SEC in the US, the EU here. And, you know, a lot has been said, so I will not repeat any of that. But what's important, it is great to see this evolution. We need urgent and decisive action by everyone. And I think here we also need to understand the basics. And I think we all do. Private sector contribution is essential if we are to achieve climate goals and the sustainable development goals. And it is good to see that business is rising to that challenge. We have seen evidence that society is placing trust in business to do this. So the latest Edelman Trust Barometer, for example, found that business is the most trusted institution globally, with the trust rating of 60%. Well, that is telling us quite an important story. Business is engaged, and business is going to play its part. This is consistent with my view that companies play a vital role in creating more prosperous, fulfilled societies and a more sustainable relationship with our planet. Long-term value is most effectively created by applying what I refer to as integrated thinking, and it is the concept that underpins the integrated reporting that Charles was referencing in his remarks. And it involves embedding sustainability into companies' DNA. In other words, embedding it into the company's governance and strategies, embedding priorities like climate change, diversity, human rights, education, well-being, prosperity of society, you name it. But importantly, it is about being held accountable for performance and progress against those priorities. So in that regard, I'd like to comment on the following 3 aspects. First of all, companies' responsibilities to investors as compared to broader stakeholders and how this relates to materiality considerations. The broad range of issues that affect enterprise value creation. And then finally, the global baseline and the building blocks approach, the way I see it. So on the first, we need to, of course, recognize that there are many stakeholders that have a valid interest in the company's contribution to people and the planet and the way it does business. In fact, many companies today already report to various stakeholders in recognition of this important fact. So materiality then is often talked about through two different lenses. The impact lens that we have already been referencing, which is the company's significant impacts on the economy, environment, and people, and it is often equated to a stakeholder lens. And then the enterprise value creation lens, or the so-called investor lens, which focuses on sustainability topics relevant to those making financial and economic decisions. I think it is important to recognize, and a lot has already been said about this, that over the long-term horizons, investors' success is actually affected by global economic growth and wider societal environmental issues. They have direct impact on the performance and prospects of the entities they invest in. And climate change is one of those examples where investors need to understand the climate risk in order to be able to decide how to generate long-term risk-adjusted returns. So the key point, which is consistent with what was said by many speakers before me, is that when the time horizons are long enough, there is a high degree of correlation, interdependency, if you wish, between what is important to investors and what is important to other stakeholders and society at large. So, in other words, sustainability issues and materiality consideration relevant to enterprise value creation is effectively a subset of the broader impact-focused materiality. And that is what the group of 5 has referenced as the nested materiality. And it is the 3 boxes that Professor King was referencing earlier. The other important feature of materiality, also referenced by some already in relation to sustainability topics, is that it is dynamic. Matters that appear to be remote today may become rapidly financially material, as we have just seen with the pandemic. But what I think is important to understand, that this conversation about this dynamic and nested materiality goes to the heart of what the investors are focused on. And we must recognize that capital markets have a critical need. Capital markets play a vital public interest role because we are all investors through our savings, through our pensions, and therefore we need to have standards that deliver the critical data into the market with clear understanding of what is relevant to that enterprise value creation in the short, medium, and long term. That's what's going to get our investments more viable, our investments more resilient, and that's what's going to create our prosperity. It's a valid public interest role that capital markets play, and it's a valid public interest need that we have. So now to turn to that broad range of issues that affect enterprise value. Again, enough has been said already, so I'll keep my remarks very short on this. Enterprise value is often viewed as very narrow. Well, this is not the case. It is often equated to something like a short-term financial materiality, almost referred to in some derogatory terms. But that is not the case. Focusing on value creation over the longer term must necessarily take a wider view. And as I said earlier, this is because in the longer term, enterprise value creation is interdependent with value creation for society and the environment. So if I look at climate change, it is really difficult even to envisage what company impacts would not be relevant to enterprise value creation. Climate risk is here and now, whether we look at it from short, medium, or long-term horizon. So in other words, sustainability is integral to understanding whether business is resilient and how it creates value over time. And as Professor King again referenced already, the value of companies today is represented by those intangibles such as your skilled employees, reputation, brand, intellectual capital, license to operate, customer relationships, you name it. And these are directly affected by sustainability factors. And companies that do not measure and manage these factors risk underperformance. They risk eroding their value for example, through detrimental brand reputation or loss of key people. So now, in the interest of time, let me attend quickly to the third point. Sustainability issues are global. And again, pretty much every speaker said that. It is true to say that companies have global value chains, face global risks, and access capital from global investors. So it only follows logically that we need global standards and we need to create a global baseline of what is reported to capital markets. Now, in my view, the IFRSF proposals to establish their SSB can help us achieve this quickly and effectively. We can build on this baseline using a building blocks approach, which has been recognized by IFRSF and IOSCO, and this would allow the system to include additional reporting requirements to reflect the needs of specific jurisdictions and other stakeholders, where they're not already met by the global baseline. So this is what I describe as an adopt the baseline and then top it up approach. So Europe is one of those jurisdictions where, in my view, a building blocks approach can deliver what Europe needs to meet its ambitious objectives. I think we all recognize that Europe wants and needs more in terms of corporate disclosures than a common global baseline can ever deliver. In fact, Europe has been raising the bar. It has been effectively pushing the ceiling upwards. But what we all need is to raise the floor by creating the common baseline of what is reported. And Europe has an important role to play here by being at the table, accelerating the creation of that common baseline, and by bringing it into the EU legislation. And then, of course, topping up. So in conclusion, climate change, diversity and inclusion, economic inequality, and other ESG issues require us all to come together, work together, and act with urgency. So thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Paul, you have asked for a direct commitment to SASB, so it's my pleasure to introduce Janine Goulot, CEO of SASB, and I really thank you her for the availability to be with us in the middle of the night. Thanks again, and I leave you the floor for your speech. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I apologize in advance because I do fear the audience will hear a lot of repetition, which I think is a good thing because I do think it means that globally we're coalescing around some very similar concepts, which are what's going to be ultimately necessary to have a system of corporate disclosure that's coherent around the world. So first, let me just briefly, for those of you who don't know, introduce the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB. So SASB is an independent nonprofit organization. We set standards to guide the disclosure of financially material sustainability information by companies to their investors. And we use the term sustainability to refer to the intersection between sustainability and enterprise value. So how do sustainability issues influence the ability of a company to create value over the long term? And in our standards, we characterize sustainability issues into 5 dimensions. And those are the environment, social capital, human capital, business model and innovation, and leadership and governance. So this is a momentous year for advancing sustainability disclosure. And I love what Veronica said about her quote about decades of progress in weeks. That is absolutely what it feels like right now. First, the IFRS Foundation announced preliminary plans to develop a sustainability standards board. At SASB, we do believe the IFRS Foundation is uniquely positioned to establish legitimacy around sustainability disclosure standards for capital markets, just as they established that legitimacy for financial reporting. Secondly, and we heard a lot about this earlier, Europe has taken significant steps in driving non-financial reporting forward through the revision of its non-financial reporting directive. And then more recently, the US is sending signals on wanting to address ESG disclosure and also sending signals about openness to international cooperation. So the good news is that there's a very solid foundation of work on which all of these efforts can build. And that's the work of the group of five, SASB, CDP, CDSB, GRI, and the IIRC, all of the work that we published last year around a shared vision for a comprehensive corporate reporting system. To help accelerate progress towards this system and simplify the landscape, SASB and IIRC announced that we are merging into the Value Reporting Foundation. Our target is to complete that merger in June. And together, the IR framework and the SASB standards provide a more complete picture about how a company creates enterprise value over the long term and enables us to meet investor needs for comparable, consistent, and reliable information. So if you think about this, the IR framework provided high-level principles for talking about how a company creates value. The SASB standards provide detailed metrics and industry-specific metrics to measure performance. And those two things combined are very powerful tools for comprehensive reporting. So we're here today to talk about the challenges of building a comprehensive corporate reporting system that meets the needs of many jurisdictions and many users of non-financial disclosure. And we've talked a lot about already today about how important it is to understand that non-financial information serves a broad array of stakeholders, including civil society, policymakers, NGOs, and investors. And that does make designing a system around non-financial reporting challenging, because designing a system that serves such a broad array of users is more challenging than traditional financial reporting, which really serves primarily a user around providers of financial capital. So that's why we think the EU's double materiality concept, or what we call nested materiality in the group of five work, we think that nested materiality concept is very, very helpful because it helps provide an organizing framework to think about how to create a system of standards that can meet all of these needs. This global system has to allow for both global comparability and regional specificity to meet regional public policy goals. But in an ideal world, we also need to understand, and as has been mentioned many times before, global capital markets are global, supply chains are global, and how do we have some foundational level of global consistency? So that's why we've evolved this language around the building blocks and a system of separate but interlocking building blocks that can be used by different jurisdictions around the globe to construct a system or to construct requirements that are consistent with their legal requirements and their public policy objectives. Now, there are two ways these building blocks can work. They can ultimately fit together into a coherent whole, or they can just be a jumble of confused blocks on the floor. And what is it going to take to really make them a coherent whole? We think it's really important that there be some sort of top-down architecture at the global level. And that top-down architecture addresses things like, what are the high-level categories? Is it IIRC's 6 capitals? Is it SASB's 5 sustainability dimensions? Is it the 3 categories that are laid out by the EFRAG task force? Is it GRI's 3 categories? That kind of top-down architecture, if we can make something like that consistent globally, then both global and regional standards would flow into a common architecture, and that makes digitization significantly easier. It makes building different standards into a coherent whole significantly easier. So you'll hear us talk a lot about top-down architecture. The other thing I'd really want to just mention briefly is that we're really, really excited about the IFRS's working group that they announced yesterday. I think it's that working group that is going to give us a structured way to think about this top-down architecture. And we think that we can then think about how the various standards and frameworks that exist can then literally be integrated into that top-down architecture into a more coherent whole. So I just want to say in summary that, you know, what we envision, and this is true for SASB as it stands today, for SASB and IIRC as we merge into the Value Reporting Foundation, what we envision is a future in which there's a coherent and comprehensive system of corporate reporting that helps bring the interest of businesses, investors, and broader society into closer alignment. And that comprehensive system must address both financial materiality and impact materiality, and it must provide global comparability, or at least a baseline of global comparability, while, as Veronica said, enabling jurisdictions around the world to top up for additional requirements as consistent with their own policy objectives. So by building that foundation, that global foundation, we can not only ratchet up our individual ambitions, but our collective global progress. So I'll stop right there. We're thrilled about all of the progress that has been made in the last year, and looking forward to continuing to work with all our colleagues and continuing to move forward.
Thanks a lot for your speech, Mrs. Guillot, in which we could have a picture of an idea to how we could go on in the process to integrate standard. And now the floor is for Eelco van der. And then I excuse myself because definitely the pronunciation of the word will be not nice, but I do my best. Board member of the Global Reporting Initiative. Thanks a lot to have been here with us today. You are on mute.
No, I'm not. Thank you. You're doing pretty well with my name, by the way, so no problems there. I hope in my short speech that I will cover most of the questions asked. But before going a bit into detail, the following. And what I noticed that the debate on sustainability is more and more transformed into a discussion on standards and materiality. And it's a pity that I think some of us no longer focus on sustainability as such and what it in fact takes to make this world a better place. Reducing carbon, enhancing diversity, safeguarding human and labor rights, protecting biodiversity, reducing tax avoidance and evasion, and overall stop cynicism. But let's go back to the topic. To achieve the SDGs by 2030, we need, I think, the intrinsic will of business leaders and politicians to include them as strategic objectives besides value creations for their own sake alone. When this intrinsic will is there, the second step is how to communicate with stakeholders what we have achieved and what we pursue. And this is about building the trust in society that is so necessary. And when it comes to environmental, social, and governance, stakeholders that have an interest are, of course, investors, employees, suppliers, the communities where we operate in, but also that we sometimes forget, that is the public elected officials who manage our society. A third step, if we have decided this, is how to, with input from the stakeholders, what information then is relevant to publish. And as this whole process must come together, of course, within the context of safeguarding business interest and proportionality. Value creation and profit are absolutely fair objectives in my opinion. They are necessary to drive innovation, and if combined with stewardship for the environment, people and society, we're absolutely on the right track. Unfortunately, when it comes to ESG reporting, I have sometimes the feeling that it's being framed out there as if there are two competing forces. On the one hand, those that adhere financial materiality and investors within the House of IFRS, and on the other hand, the supporters of double materiality and stakeholder approach under the banner of the EU. I think we should do a better job in communicating this clearly. I strongly believe that both are important. Society cannot thrive without business and investors, but business and investors can't thrive without society. It's what Professor King already said. Neither can solve environmental and social issues by themselves. And both have a duty, I think, to address the connectivity between the two of them. For a long time now, there has been a very strong demand for a global ESG standard. And creating ESG standards and global ESG standards is a very time-consuming task. And sometimes, I have to say, it is also used as a tool for obstruction. We have seen that, for example, in tax. Personally, I do not consider unilateral or European or private initiative as bad, and that's also basically what the previous speaker said. They're all a force for change and progress, and on files that otherwise could or would remain blocked and deadlocked. So having one global initiative, of course, would be preferable, but sometimes having some initiatives is better than none or blocked ones. And besides, don't we currently have, when it comes to financial reporting under FAS, IAS, and local statutory accounts? And I can see over time a system that will develop whereby IFRS will take on board financial materiality and the ESG approach, and EU will take on board more the double materiality multi-stakeholder interest approach. And over time, these two sets of standards will be perfectly compatible, and with a bit of effort and goodwill of all players and all parties involved, we will get there. And that these two sets of standards can indeed live side by side is, of course, already evidenced by the fact that more than 10,000 large companies around the world are already using GRI, of course, beside the financial reporting standards under either IFRS or FAS. And then we have the role that has not mentioned yet, the role of accountants. If we are to take ESG seriously, accountants must play a role in assessing the quality of reported ESG data, not only financial data that may fit in their current comfort zone, but also non-financial data. Impact on society matters and therefore should be in scope within their audit activities. Let me give you one concrete example where financial materiality only approach on a topic that has a great impact on society does not work. And again, tax. If you look at tax, it is key to achieving the UN SDGs, and tax is an ESG metric. And if you look at IAS 12 income tax, the information provided there has been considered inefficient by many stakeholders. Hence the specific ask from investors and stakeholders to GRI to introduce and design a tax standard, what became GRI 207. It's a widely acclaimed standard being used already by very large multinationals voluntarily, which is remarkable since the first financial reporting year will be 2021. The 207 standard includes reporting requirements on strategy, risk management, stakeholder engagement, and per country multi-tax information. If we would have tax left as belonging exclusively to the financial materiality criteria, and if we as GRI technical committee drafters would have been deterred by the myriad of excuses that were offered as to why tax should be excluded from scope, this important standard would not have seen the light of day. Tax for sure has an impact on society, and I can only advise you all to have a look at the GRI 207 reports that companies have already published, and if you want to know which companies that are, you can reach out after this event to me. So to conclude, there have been financial standards for decades, and not to be a spoiler, but it proved very difficult and time-consuming to change them, let alone introduce new ones. Times have changed. We live in an era of transparency by default. There is a trust gap, unfortunately, between business, politics, and society, and that will not be solved by adding a couple of standards into an existing financial reporting framework that may take years. It needs more. We know some investors have a very strong preference for certain standards and the IFRS approach. It's perfectly fair, and even strongly suggesting companies to focus on the financial materiality. I personally think we should be careful in what the objectives are, and the objective should not be only to make companies report to something that fits in an algorithm linked to a platform to sell ESG funds, or as a means to easy risk assess so-called sustainable investments. ESG then could become a check the box exercise, and that must not happen. We need sustainability reporting alongside and on equal footing with financial reporting, and as far as I'm concerned, mandated and assured. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van der Henden, for your contribution and for your critical view that make up a little bit the debate. Now we are at the end of our special guest. We have Eric Dugelet, I suppose like that, from the TCFD, from IFRS, and other speaker has been make the point that climate change is definitely the first aspect that we need to afford in the same way. So I leave you the floor to tell you your view.
Thank you very much indeed, and I'm really humbled by the 7 speakers that talked before me, with characters, in particular Mr. Mervyn King. I'm so happy to be with you virtually in the room. Indeed, the TCFD is about climate change only, and that probably makes it a very special standard setter, if you want, or let's say a special framework, not a standard setter, because the scope is narrower than ESG at large. I would say that the second thing that distinguishes a little bit the TCFD from the rest, and TCFD is not part of the group of 5 that Veronica Poole represented earlier, is the fact that the focus is on the resilience of the organization, namely how would the organization and also the financial systems be still alive after climate change materializes. So I'll be just following the 4 questions that were asked when we prepared. As to the first question, whether the regional approaches live together with the tentative global approaches, I would say that as a Deloitte partner, and I've been a Deloitte partner for the last 20 years in this particular field, and I'm so delighted by all the progress that have been done in the field of ESG disclosures over the past 20 years. But certainly what I can tell you is that my clients, be it in France or elsewhere, as I had a global role during 4 years, they feel what everyone calls the reporting overhang. That really puts a lot of pressure on them. And so indeed, all the efforts that can be done to consolidate the standards will be really welcome. And I would say that as far as the TCFD, this is a global initiative, right? And it's a task force from the Financial Stability Board.
we report to the Financial Stability Board. The Financial Stability Board is an entity that was invented by the G20 countries further to the 2008 subprime crisis. And it's probably around 85% of the GNP globally. So it is global. But when it comes to regional approaches, obviously the European Union has a say on the topic, as a lot of initiatives were generated in this part of the world over the past 20 years. So in my view, and in the TCFD's view, it is crucial that the current work undertaken by the task force of the AFRAC lab that establishes recommendations for the European Commission really generates discussions with the IFRS Foundation. And that the two initiatives would nurture each other, and that we would have a building block approach, as was proposed earlier during today's presentations. So actually the recent EFRAC lab report mentions that this effort will be done to make sure that there is, in a way, homogeneous approach between the global approach of the IFRS and that particular local one. I hope for that, basically. The second question is whether we should only look at sustainability information or the broader value creation. So my view on that, sustainability is already quite a broad topic, from human rights, gender diversity, to air and water pollution and climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, just to name a few of them. So that taxonomy, in a way, is good enough, in my view. And so obviously it leads to broader value creation. But the current discussions around the inclusion of the social dimension within the criteria of the European Union green taxonomy attest of how complicated it is already to add social to climate and environmental. So I would go for something simple and really concentrate on the three pillars: the economic, the social, and the environmental. We collectively manage to promote a greener economy, or rather a sustainable economy, and value creation will be a natural result of this effort. I mean, value creation for the corporate world, as well as value creation for the planet. So actually, such value creation is an objective of most sustainability think tanks, and in particular the IARC. The third question about the wider stakeholders, or primarily the investors. Well, as I said, I've seen it happen. I've seen December 2013, you remember the first paper by the IARC. This was the first time, I think, that the focus, the main focus was the investor's point of view. And then came the implementation of SASB a few years later, and 2015 was the creation of the TCFD, which I represent today. All three do mention that they have an interest in the point of view of the investor, for sure. But as a former board member of the Global Reporting Initiative, which I was, by the way, when I was asked to join the TCFD, I can tell you that I fully validate the need for a point of view that includes wider stakeholders and society. And in that respect, I think there is a lot to be learned from the GRI, as the GRI does encompass the investors in its range of stakeholders. It's not like if GRI was not involving the investors. And on the other hand, SASB has indeed sometimes and wrongly been labeled as promoting the exclusive point of view of the investors. I don't think this is correct, and Janine could probably confirm that. I'm sure she could, because the underlying intent, even of the SASB, is also to save the planet. So there is a high level of convergence. And if we could go to the last two slides, because my point on the last question, which is about materiality, is rather technical from the TCFD standpoint. I won't read the whole slide, but I can tell you that being on board of the TCFD, I would have imagined that there will be a lot of discussions about how would we at TCFD define materiality. and it did not happen. We decided in a way to avoid. Again, the point of view is how material the impacts of climate change will be on the resilience of the company in future years. And the future years sometimes is a very remote time horizon, as the major recommendation of the TCFD is the one on climate-related scenario analysis. And you have to imagine the company in a few years or even a few decades. So that's the point of view of the TCFD. And in the TCFD remit, as it was defined by the FSB, we emphasized that we would need to incorporate the principle of materiality. And the TCFD recognizes that most information included in the financial filings is subject to materiality assessment. However, because climate-related risks is a non-diversifiable risk that affects nearly all industries, many investors believe it requires special attention. And so we have decided on the last slide, please, to differentiate between the four categories of the TCFD recommendations, actually the four recommendations of the TCFD. One is governance, the other one is risk management, third one is strategy, and the last one is metrics and targets. We've decided that the disclosures related to governance and risk management, they should be included in the annual filing, and that therefore they should not be subject to a materiality assessment. Should not be subject to a materiality assessment. They should be in. And for the rest, for the strategy and metrics and targets, yes, we propose, by the way, we did not propose that in December 2016, but we did propose that in June 2017 after we polled the market, and the market told us maybe it's going to be complicated. So we said, for strategy and metrics and targets, please do your materiality analysis. In case you think the information is not deemed material, well, you don't necessarily need to put the emphasis, but we do one exception. I told you it's a little bit technical. When the company is big, when it's above 1 billion, US dollar equivalent in annual revenue, in particular when it is in one of our four sectors of activities that we believe are the ones that will be most impacted by climate change, and they are materials and buildings, agriculture, and energy and resources, and transportation. So that probably concludes my presentation regarding the four questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dugelet. We arrive at the end of this section, so it's my pleasure to invite Stefano Zambon, our General Secretary, for the our discussion to do his final speech. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Marisa, for your chair. Thank you. First of all, let me thank you as the final speaker of our long session. Let me thank you, all the speakers, for their contributions, the richness, and the importance of, especially in this moment in time, as Professor Alessandro Lai stressed this morning, this moment in time, which seems to be really a turning point in these very weeks, I mean. In terms of discussion, I would like just to mention, unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember that about 50 years ago, the European Commission started, in 1967 to be precise, started a new project that would have led in 1978 to the approval of the fourth EC directive on company accounts. Maybe some of you may remember that. And of course, this was in 67. There was the avant-projet by Professor Elmendorf. And in 73, just a few years after, while the discussion were, quite alive in Europe, in 1973, the International Accounting Standards Committee
was founded in the World Congress of Accountants in Sydney, especially led by Lord Benson of the UK profession. So it's an old episode, and probably only professors remember this, but it's a very important sort of precedent in a sense, because also in that moment in time, there seemed to be two approaches. One was the directives, European directives on accounting, and of course there was the professional response. To some extent, it was not direct response, but politically was a response, I think, with the foundation, the establishment of ISC at that time. Later on, we know the end of the story. We know that in the year 2000, in 2003, an appeasement of being found, an agreement, and now seems to be working quite well in general, of course. So in a sense, there's a hope here that this willingness also to converge can be done maybe in a sort of a quicker times, because it took maybe about 30 years to find the accommodation between the global and the regional approach as to accounting and traditional accounting, I might say. And so there's a hope, probably looking back at history, that this equilibrium can be found earlier on than 30 years. Let me stress 2-3 points that struck me this morning in the presentations by our very distinguished speakers. One is the political aspect. In a sense, what we're dealing with, and this is quite clear, I think, in all the speakers, what we're dealing here is something more than a professional aspect. This has been stressed, as I said, by all the speakers. So there's a political dimension, governmental dimension, that is, of course, very important. And that's why both EFRAG and, of course, also the IFRS initiative, correctly, I think, fairly enough, just trying to get governmental institutions inside the process, because of course we're not dealing only with financial, well, only so to speak, but financial aspects, but the issues at stake are much more involving humankind, basically. And of course you need probably some governmental and political involvement, which of course delicate, because for European Commission is by definition a governmental institution, and of course ISB and IFRS Foundation is a private foundation. So this might be an important element to consider also for the friends of the IFRS Foundation, to find an equilibrium between the private action and of course the governmental and political aspects. Another important thing that struck me this morning is the time horizon. Many speakers mentioned this. Alan Deckers, of course, we're talking about 2024, probably for the application, the actual implementation, the new directive on non-financial reporting. 2022 will be probably approved or published, and so it will take probably 1-2 years for implementation, as always. So time horizon is crucial. Also, Elko mentioned that. Time is, I'm not sure we have all that time, and I think not only for the climate problems that we all know we have, but also for greenwashing, because of course the more we don't have compulsory mandatory standards on all these issues, there's a concrete risk of greenwashing by many organizations. I don't want to be cynical, of course, but we also have to be realistic. We have to go through a reality check. Another aspect that struck me is about the conceptual aspect, I would say, as an old professor, in the sense that it's just mentioned by Eric 1 second ago, the fact that there seemed to be a juxtaposition between bit of a conflict to some extent. This is what is the perception, perhaps, between the Brundtland reporting, like Professor Mervyn King mentioned, so the stakeholder-oriented reporting for sustainability reporting, of course, enterprise value reporting, which is also a different form of sustainability reporting. Of course, these aspects are to be probably addressed in a very careful way, because there are already seen some reactions in the web, also by a number of academics, as Professor Reichling probably knows very well. A number of academics that wrote a kind of, letter dense of contents, maybe right, maybe wrong as always, but a strong reaction against the involvement in the IFRS Foundation, because of the fear that the IFRS Foundation will look only at investors, which is, probably not necessarily that is the aim, the purpose, but just to mention the risk that the two kind of the perception of two different sustainability reports, it has to be addressed in a very careful way. And in particular, let me point out one aspect, what is value? I think value concept is a bit of a kryptonite of the sustainability reporting and the future of sustainability reporting. I think to some extent also, talking about conceptual aspects, also value somehow has to be clarified, what is meant by value. A final aspect I would like to mention is about intangibles. I'm sorry, each of us has his or her own hobbies. I see the chair smiling at me. And the fact is that personally, but like a wiki, like Sumita-san said, in the picture, in the landscape of sustainability, intangibles play a very important role. Can we put up the one slide, a very quick slide I have? Thank you. Because this comes from the wiki intangibles reporting framework, and it's a very simple slide, and which replicates what basically Sumita-san said already. In a sense, very often I've heard that in the EFRAG work, in the task force works, there's been a mentioning the bridging. What bridges sustainability and financial? Well, to me, but also to Wiki and many of the commentators, it seems to me obvious that intangibles are in between. And I think this is an important element to be considered for completing both sustainability and financial reporting. So thank you for this. Let's go back just for final word. So intangibles, I think, should be part of the picture. So final word is about the role of OIBR. I think after a long morning full of ideas, very important speakers, which I personally, but also on behalf of the foundation, I thank very much for being here with us, also with some heroic efforts like Janine. And I would like to point out that our foundation would like to play a role, is ready to play a role. We're already working we are wiki jurisdiction, Italian wiki jurisdiction. We have already endorsement letters from IRC, GRI, and SASB. We have very good relationship with World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We just contributing to the G20 debate and B20 debate this year in Italy. We produced a document together with the IRC on the role of intangibles in delivering SDGs. And we collaborated with EFRAG, of course, and with my friend Patrick de Cambour, the task force, and especially with regards to intangibles. So in a sense, we think we would like to play a role in that. We're ready to collaborate and give a contribution to this fantastic moment of evolution of non-financial and sustainability reporting. So let me just close once again, thanking all the speakers and the chairs for the great work. And I think, we would like maybe to repeat sometimes further down the road in 1 year or two, again, this meeting at this level, at such an international high level. Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Thank you again also to all our attendees, and see you again at 3 o'clock in the afternoon for the afternoon section, more focused on Italian situation. Thank you very much. Have a nice lunch.